Hello. Welcome. Guess what? Today I got my first payout from Patreon. Ooh. I'm excited about that. Thank you for the people who are subscribed on Patreon. Subscribed, on the stream itself. That certainly is helpful. But the subscribers on Patreon do support me more directly. There is less that is taken out of the payouts for subscriptions. There is a $3 tier. This is the smallest tier, cheapest tier, I guess. That's just if you're kind-hearted and want to help me, my little mostly unemployed self. I know that's a vague thing to say, and I mean it that way. So, with all of these other things that I'm doing to make money that I will be vague about, it very much is helpful to me to have Patreon subscribers. So, thank you very much. This is where I have been uploading VODs that are not able to be uploaded fully on YouTube. So, for the ones that have like major cuts because of copyright stuff, surprise, surprise, a lot of them are from Culture Corner because I go over shit that is copyrighted. A lot of music. This is what happens when you are a music lover and you are engaging in trying to post about things that you enjoy. But it really is wild how there are these various levels to copyright and what artists can allow for their music. And I have noticed especially that there are white artists, white passing artists specifically, that are becoming much more stringent with copyright. It used to be that Charlie XCX would have like fair use as part of her music and music videos. Now, anytime her music or music videos are being used, there is a copyright strike associated. So, calling you out, bitch. I am associating this with class. So, it just seems to be something that people who are more white presenting, I'm being honest here, also as someone who is assumed to be white and white presenting, I feel a need to call this shit out. That it seems very classist. Also, Slater does this. I enjoy Slater's music. But the more I'm listening to the lyrics of Slater's music, I'm like, okay, this is pretty overtly classist. And I'm tired of this shit. I'm tired of people just constantly wanting to flaunt fame and money and labels, all of this stuff. So I think that's annoying. How about let it be fair use for of us who are poor? Hello, Aliana. Welcome. How are you doing? That is such a cute emote. I love that. It's Friday and Culture Corner. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. Welcome to whatever this is. An attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee. And it's Pride. Happy Revolutionary Pride. Not Pride. Ugh. Pride. Revolutionary Pride in its original sense. So, meaning the kind of Stonewall uprising sense. Because we have enough of people just wanting to put on rainbows. Like, not to, like, be rude, but I saw something the other day, someone who was, like, well-meaning that was like, oh, is this happening for Pride? I need to get out my rainbow gear. I'm like, okay, first off, you're only associating Pride Month with rainbow gear, and it's, like, put away the rest of the year? Excuse me, we need this kind of allyship, supposedly. allyship throughout the year. But okay, interesting. Don't get mad if you see people engaging in art projects and makeovers, especially when it is in protest against the state and their property, because that's what pride means. Anyway, good to see you, Aliana. You found a baby bird. Oh, I don't give a fuck. Oh, I hope the baby bird is okay. Also, that like you are staying safe with hygienic things with birds. Birds being a little more likely with carrying some diseases, but also I really admire that sentiment. You know what kind of bird it is? Happy Revolutionary Pride! The baby's in the chat. It's probably okay. It's too stressed to eat. Oh, in a shoebox. That probably is helpful for it. I have no clue what kind of bird. That's okay. I wouldn't know. I would have no idea where to start, despite growing up watching a shit ton of Animal Planet. So, there we go. Okay. So, let's get into what I have planned for today. This is a video from The Onion. It was recommended. I keep messing with this mic. I need to stop doing that. It was recommended on a video that we were watching yesterday about the last millennial dying from The Onion, a satire outlet. They do some very funny things. And this one says, are GLP-1s hurting the Charles Barkley positivity movement? And I'm not that familiar with Charles Barkley. I do know that he is on Ozempic or a GLP-1 of some sort. But it is interesting because I don't think he's part of this crowd. But many people who get famous for like being a person who is of a larger size, love, beautiful, but then once they get access to a certain level of fame and wealth where they are able to get on Ozempic, that they're then like, hey, I'm just trying to be healthy and I'm proud of my body no matter what size it is. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But also, did you not listen to any of the things that like you said in your own body of work and art? Looking at like Lizzo, Meghan Trainor, they're all on Ozempic and being like, okay, so you were talking about body positivity. It's the body positivity crowd that is more suspicious. As someone who is more on like the demi spectrum, ace pan spectrum, I'm like, does it even occur to you though that like bodies are kind of gross sometimes? Bodies can be kind of gross, but even more so when people have shitty opinions and they treat people in a shitty way. I think this is my propaganda for being demi or just advocating more for like waiting till people open their mouths before deciding if you are like wanting to pursue someone or if they're attractive or not. People can't control attraction really, but that's my propaganda. It certainly makes things more straightforward, not having to be like manipulated through being attracted just purely on like a sexual attraction basis. So I guess there's that. Happy Pride. Anyway, let's watch this video about Charles Barkley. I have no idea what it's about. I don't know much about him or his career, besides that he played basketball and is a commentator now. That he, surprisingly, these days is more of a trans ally. So that's great. Glad to see that. But other than that, don't know. Don't know about him. So we'll see if I will even understand what this is about.
At all the benefits, it's easy to see why
Oh, here we go.
When you look at all the benefits, it's easy to see why GLP-1s have become so popular. They're good for your heart, good for blood pressure, kidney and liver health, and of course, weight loss. But where GLP-1s have set us back greatly is in the Charles Barkley positivity movement. Very quickly, society has gone from rejecting dated beauty standards of what a Charles Barkley should look like to fully embracing a thin version of Charles Barkley as the ideal Charles Barkley.
Chuck was fat last year, and I look at him, he's a sex symbol.
He got a point about the sex symbol.
Which is jarring because it wasn't that long ago that advocacy groups and the media were preaching that every Charles Barkley is beautiful no matter what size.
Absolutely. And the Barkley positivity.
This is great. Okay, so this is more about what I was thinking it would be about. We don't need to understand all of the sports references that I will not get. I was watching, or I was like trying to like edit something the other day, a video. I've been trying to do a little more about not just like cutting random things up, being a little more intentional about editing certain things and posting them. It is a lot of work, so I don't always engage in this. But I said something like trying to claim like, oh yeah, didn't they like play this team? And I was completely wrong. So this is why I just don't engage in any of this kind of discourse. I'm never posturing as being an authority, as being an expert. So anything, this is a disclaimer. Anything that I possibly say about sports is most likely wrong. Okay? Just keep that in mind. And actually go to people who understand what these types of sporting activities are and who are all of the main players in it, in this space, because I am not the one to be talking to about this, clearly. I love as well with The Onion how it's just in the details, all of the details that they have going on, and how they clock, especially the wooden panels that are always in these podcasts or even in streamers like YouTubers, creators of digital media. And I know that a lot of the time it's like, oh, we're soundproofing the room, and this is a way to cover it up. But it also is kind of like this lazy nod to mid-century modern design without actually understanding the design a lot of the time. So it's like, if you're actually going to do it, at least engage with the rest of the design, not just using this as like a thing that everyone else is using. But again, that's the contrarian in me, and also being pretentious and being like, oh, understand what you're engaging with, while I'm actively saying don't listen to anything I say about the worms.
Activity movement wasn't just a fad. I mean, it truly took social media by storm in the 2010s and finally forced people to reckon with just how Charles Barkley phobic society had become. People's eyes were finally open, and this led to a full embrace of Charles Barkley positivity.
Right.
We had the first ever Charles Barkley on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and of course the iconic Dove ad campaign, I'm a round mound of rebound too.
And if it turns out these GLP-1s aren't effective on Charles Barkley's in the long
That
run?
is clearly fake. A mound round of a rebound.
Actually be doing more harm than good to
I love
Charles's
that rhyming.
eyes. When you look at all the benefits, it's
The internal rhyme scheme there, that really got me. That really appealed to the literature nerd in me. All right, let's see what these comments are about. This feels like one writer saw the Shaq clip and went, I have an idea. I freaking hate not noticing it's The Onion until 30 seconds in. I was really confused what they were talking about for a while until I realized it was from The Onion. While these drugs are causing a rejection of the Charles Barkley acceptance of the past, they are resulting in big profits for Big Pharma, which is still happy to be large and in charge. Exactly. I think that also is something in talking about, Ozempic and all of these beauty standards that people are engaging in now, especially the crowd that's like, we should never be commenting about anyone's appearance ever. I think in an ideal world, that would be nice, but we continue have to engage in this kind of conversation because of celebrities not being open about their use of these kinds of drugs. Also, they are the caricatures and like avatars, the billboards of what beauty and fashion is, which they're both industries, capitalist industries. They aren't just art. Instead of just saying like, oh yeah, the beauty art or like the fashion art, it's like the beauty industry, the fashion industry. These are things that are owned and dictated by capitalists who are, direct descendants of Nazis a lot of the time, and they have a direct investment in what we perceive of ourselves and other people to be beautiful, which often is falling under these white supremacist, Eurocentric beauty standards of thinness. Also, I have been saying that Ozempic is a way to essentially commodify starvation. And especially as we are seeing all of these aspects of genocide and these humanitarian issues that are happening in Palestine, in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that people are quite literally starving, that as this aspect of buying groceries, the economy, the global economy is getting much harder for people to exist in, that people are not able to buy groceries like they used to, and how this is, in my mind, some propaganda to be like, oh, it's good to be thin, just don't eat. You're too fat anyway. And it's the same people who own these types of industries, the beauty industries and big pharma, who also own all of these other types of food companies that are monopolies that are putting shit in our food to make us sick and kill us, essentially, but also to then blame us for being like, oh, you're fat, that's your fault. It's like, okay, this is so problematic. But to the people, once again, I'm saying this, reiterating this, to the people who are claiming that, like, we should not speculate who is on Ozempic or not, it's like, if they have not come out and said if they're on Ozempic or not, I think it is probably good to be talking about this, because like with plastic surgery and actually acknowledging a lot of the harm that it has done to beauty standards and not being transparent about work that people get done and how it really skews, especially young women and queer people and disabled people who are growing up with all of these messages of like, oh, you must be commodified, you must be a product in order to be accepted or viewed as beautiful. And to these people, I just want to remind them that fat phobia is systemic, that people can still be made fun of for being skinny, that it's not necessarily like the best kind of behavior, the most idealistic kind of behavior to be speculating if people are on Ozempic, but also with fat phobia, oh my God, with fat phobia being a systemic phenomenon, we must engage in some of this discourse in order to break down these structures, because fat phobia is way more prevalent in the world than skinny phobia is, or like criticizing people for being too skinny. That it's like, okay, what about seatbelts? What about airplanes? What about seats themselves? Like, are these built for people who are not of a very particular size? And people who are not even viewed necessarily as being fat, but just like, there are constant messages to people of like, you need to look a particular way, your body has to be this particular size in order to be accepted in society, or like able to access every part of society. Like, there is not skinny phobia when people cannot or feel uncomfortable going to amusement parks and not being able to ride rides. Like, that is not something that is closed off from them. So that's my rant. But anyway, I did want to finish up with some of these videos that we started yesterday or that I mentioned that I wanted to watch. So we'll catch up on this video that Linton shared. It was with Akala and Ash Sarkar with Novara Media, and they're talking about race and class, especially in the UK. But it is just a really great conversation that I think we need to continue to ingest and marinate in. Okay. So we are on this section just finishing World War II, where they're talking about this phenomenon of after World War II, I mean, during World War II, because of World War II, all of the bombing that happened in the UK on UK soil, that labor from these various colonies still of the British Empire in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in Southeast Asia, primarily India, how people were brought in, people of color, in order to be a source of cheap labor and rebuild. And so this is where we left off and where they're starting to get into more of like the resistance of ill treatment when people are getting to the UK.
In the Caribbean. And then they realise actually white people at home are quite oppressed, actually.
I mean, you're pretty scathing in the book of an anti-racism which is based just on black bourgeois excellence. And you do really interrogate that kind of way of thinking. What do you think the potential is right now for a multi-ethnic, anti-racist, class-based movement?
I think it depends where in the world you are. I think it would be really arrogant of us to say to black Americans, for example, given the history of white supremacist racist terrorism in America.
Winston Churchill wanted to use chemical weapons on the civilian population of India to suppress them, fun fact. True. And the development of things like mustard gas in World War I were used first by the British Empire on the people of India to justify their genocide and oppression and, you know, like this type of colonial behavior of using colonies, primarily places in the global south, but where there are people of color, where the environment is full of a lot of resources, that they're like, oh, let's experiment here before we engage in larger warfare. While the British didn't do that, they had a 200 civilian massacre where British troops killed men, women, and children in India. Yeah, I think that's a really great thing to bring up, especially when considering how, I need to bring up the number for this, because I brought it up yesterday, but, Winston Churchill, India famine. Okay, so Winston Churchill created a famine in India when he diverted resources and food from India, because India was a continual source of colonial extraction for the British Empire, that not only were troops from India put on the front lines of fighting in the war, just to be used as collateral damage, as lives literally being worth less than white British people in the British colonies. Excuse me. He also diverted all of this food so that it created a man-made famine. The Bengal famine of 1943 was a famine during World War II in the Bengal province, in Orissa province in British India. An estimated 800,000, 3.82 3.8 million people died. That is a huge discrepancy there of like, okay, so less than a million to almost 4 million. Excuse me. There is quite a difference there. I mean, it's still way too many people, like in a like just disgusting amount of people that were unnecessarily killed, but no one was good in World War II. Exactly. Exactly. And that is one of the biggest myths and propaganda that is taught in the US specifically in the school system, especially in these conservative states where they're like, "Oh, we fought Nazis." And it's like, you wouldn't have probably if Hitler hadn't declared the US as an enemy after World War II after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and Pearl Harbor was bombed because the US had this oil embargo. So it's like all of this is taught as like these unrelated circumstances that people just don't like the US because of being so powerful and cool, instead of being like, oh, you're a terrorist. This is a terrorist nation. So there's that. Those greater evils killed white-looking folk while the Allies killed darker folk and Asian folk without repercussion. Yeah. The US gave their Marines an order in World War II. All Japanese civilians were valid targets to them. Yes. You could see footage of planes shooting fishermen from Japan. They'd pillage villages, all of that. Yeah, that happened in Japan and even in these places that were in Europe of like raping and pillaging, like France, as the US was supposedly liberating the French, where it's like the US Army has been a terrorist organization for a very long time. It was Nazi versus Nazis. Exactly. It was like Nazi double stuffed versus like Nazi masked. Yeah, there was a reason why the US was not interested in fighting the Third Reich for a very long time until they were literally called out as an enemy by the Nazi regime, because many people in the US actually liked Hitler because fascism is closer to capitalism than it is to any sort of left-leaning ideology, leftist ideology especially. But and this is where it's important to call out that like many people categorize fascism as late-stage capitalism, and how there can be fascist tactics that are used to reinforce capitalism, that like the vehicle of capitalism can be used, whether it is there are restraints put in or not, but like very intentionally how it is built, it is fascist in its origin, in trying to create these hierarchies of human dignity, that is part of what the system is built to do. That's like, of course, that's what this leads to. I think it's a mental illness that needs to be masked. Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I think we need to have a conversation about how there are certain ideologies that are particularly like a type of psychosis almost, or like collective psychosis, like it's a type of delusion, but then also understanding like and wanting to be careful how like people with mental illness are just constantly demonized and mistreated. So like how do we talk about this in ways that's like accurate but also not stigmatizing? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do think that fascism and like white supremacy, these types of delusion, it's like a collective like delusion and hysteria that people are believing, where it's like it makes people exhibit very paranoid behavior, very, again, like delusional behavior of like finding enemies wherever they're going, that it's like that is concerning. But just because it is in the context of a system that encourages their side, that it's viewed as being normal, and revered even. Like, I think we also need to talk about how, like, class can breed more narcissism, and maybe that just has to do with, like, capitalism and, like, capitalists being narcissists, but also is that stigmatizing people with narcissistic personality disorder? But then, like, if they actually got diagnosed, would they be considered people with NPD? I don't know. This is what goes on in my mind when I'm like, I don't know if we should be framing it as mental illness, but it certainly feels like it in some ways, or if this is just accepted, or it's not viewed as a mental illness, but they just want to demonize certain kinds of mental illness, especially when it comes to class, which honestly, that's probably what a lot of it is. It's like the stigma we associate with mental illness just directly has to do with class and race, especially. Okay. Anyway, yes. So, the criminality that existed in World War II just was far-reaching. Exactly what you were saying, Aliana. That it was Nazis fighting Nazis. Yeah. So this happened. This famine in the Bengal region, which is present-day Bangladesh and West Bengal. So we still see remnants of this as well, of like in Bangladesh, where the US has a very vested interest, and Western powers, in demonizing Bangladesh for its Muslim population. It is predominantly Muslim, and also to justify all of the atrocities that have happened to people in this region, because it has not just started, and especially when it comes to supporting the Indian fascist state, the BJP party, Narendra Modi, and all of his war crimes and all of his disgusting fascist policies that he's instituting through Hindu nationalism. That's like, this is a continuation of what has happened in the past. An estimated, so 800,000 to 3.8 million died in this region from starvation, malaria, and other diseases aggravated by malnutrition, population displacement, unsanitary conditions, poor British wartime policies, and lack of health care. Millions were impoverished as the crisis overwhelmed large segments of the economy and catastrophically disrupted the social fabric. Eventually, families disintegrated. Men sold their small farms, and that is the intent. It is to, and this is how you know it's part of a larger genocidal project, an ethnic cleansing project, is that they are looking to destroy not only like lives themselves, kill as many people as possible, but to have the disintegration of like the fabric of society. Men sold their small farms and left home to look for work or to join the British Indian Army. Also an intended consequence. And women and children became homeless migrants, often traveling to Calcutta or other large cities in search of organized relief. Yes, and then being demonized and blamed for their own displacement and homelessness, rather than acknowledging that, there are these larger forces creating the situation. So, that's a little bit of background there.
Lynchings, etc. From the white working class, given the history of the banning from unions, etc., for us to go and tell black Americans, you must accept our analysis. No, they must not. They've got to figure out for themselves as black Americans, based on their particular history, what to do next. But the situation for black and brown British people is quite different. We were moved into hoods where white people already lived. And even though there was certainly a violent racist reaction, there's nothing that can be compared to lynching in America. And it would be disrespectful to put it in that same category. And in a way now, Broadwater Farm or Stonebridge or Toxteth, these are multi-ethnic working class neighborhoods. Whether or not that's going to translate into a multi-ethnic political struggle, I don't know, because I think a lot of, Marx warns against this himself, and I'm not even sure I would consider myself, a Marxist. That's how I would define myself. A lot of people might be surprised by that. But Marx himself warned against it, this sort of idealization of the working class, this idea that the
I can appreciate that, though. I know many Marxists will be upset with me for saying that, but like, I think people who tend to latch on to figures, and like one particular ideology rather that is like fed to them rather than like ingesting many different kinds of ideologies and learning about the words and writings of philosophers and leaders, so-called leaders, thought leaders, I should say, that it's like that is I think a better examination of the world we are living in rather than just saying like I'm strictly this, rather than engaging with the very problematic aspects that exist within every kind of ideology because humans are are inherently, fallible. That's like what it means to be human. I used to read books on fascism as a youth, specifically by an Oswald Mosley, Britain's Hitler. Oh yeah. I don't know much about him, but I do know that there are very deplorable assertions from him. His work is a good case study for how to indoctrinate and convince a large mass of people to grow deep hate within them, great enough to form black blocs dedicated to political violence. Interesting. Yeah, like how you've mentioned before of like how like black bloc tactics, it's not just, I think it's commonly more talked about on the left, but actually acknowledging that there are black bloc tactics that are used by fascists, and especially when there's a lot of institutionalized fascism where there are uh much more accepted forms of living in a police state, like with ICE, like acting as the Gestapo, that sometimes it's like not even necessary for them to have their own like black bloc segments of like militias and stuff. But I mean, I guess we could consider a lot of what ICE does as like black bloc tactics too, of like how they're all dressing the same and like covering their faces, but it's just state sanctioned. And so people are like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Don't be mean. Don't be mean to cops. That's like, oh, okay. So they can do whatever they want. Interesting. But yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about the indoctrination process, especially as someone who grew up in Mormonism, of like the indoctrination of everything happens at a very young age. And when you're born into a particular type of religion or ideology, that like a lot of the time there isn't really a way to consent to that. That you're just like, oh, this is what the world is. Especially if it is a type of mind control or very like high demand religion or society ideology, that then there are not many options that are given to you to actually ingest and partake of on like an equal opportunity basis. The right takes notes from the left on how to commit an insurgency. Yeah. This is why you see fascists forming black blocs historically and to this day. If you can't take lessons from your enemy on how to win, you probably are disposable to the eyes of other organizers. Yeah, that's true. I think that's a very wise observation. Someone who's to be used, a resource to be arrested or to die as to create more guerrillas. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great observation where it's like they have not only the ruling class, but like, they align themselves with the ruling class because sadly, most of the time, like these societies we are living in are much more fascist adjacent than they are to any sort of like collective, truly democratic system where there is a class of people who are deciding things for everyone else. And then they abuse that kind of power that it's like they have a lot to have at their fingertips when it comes to adjusting and rebranding their various tactics, that like they have the time and money and means to infiltrate a lot of leftist movements, learn from it, and then use those same tactics for their own means. Lurk. No, you're good. Keep lurking.
Actions that middle-class analysts or people as intelligent as Marx himself see and have the time to sit down and write about that are felt from within that class itself. I don't think, when I was growing up, most of my brethren were not talking about seizing the means of production. That's the truth. They were talking about how can I pay my rent and keep my gas on, and how can I create a situation where my kids don't have to choose between, gas and electric every winter, and maybe I have some half-decent clothes. Those were the things that were concerning poor people. So I also am conscious of those of us who have become politicized have to be very careful that we don't impose our wishes onto people that are maybe are growing up the way we might have grown up. Now our lives have become a little bit better.
But I mean, isn't that really about respectability politics? So we can recognise, for instance, a march demanding better housing as political, whereas we might say that a riot which involves looting is just some kind of, feral outburst. And I feel that there's a bit of an overlap with maybe some of the pop cultural analysis that you do in this book, because you talk about how...
I haven't read his writing. I need to read his writing. From what I have heard of his music, like I was saying to Linton yesterday when he suggested this video, that I was like, oh, I think I've heard some of his music before, upon hearing more of it as I've gotten more familiar with his body of work, that I'm like, but I didn't realize that was him. It makes sense when people are really great lyricists and rappers that they're also great writers, because that's part of writing. So I need to read more of his stuff.
You're right.
But anyway, I really love that comment about respectability politics as well. Of like, whether usually what aligns with respectability politics is usually what is state sanctioned. And when we are engaging with these systems that are inherently anti-human most of the time, that they then are going to be perpetuating and advocating for these avenues that uphold these same systems that don't have as much weight a lot of the time when it comes to effective change, instituting effective change. And so looking exactly like what she's saying, looking at these various situations that fall outside of state-sanctioned activities that are demonized largely because the state doesn't feel like they have or doesn't have control over what is going on. And this is why it's important to continue to talk about what controlled opposition looks like. So when we are continuing to go through these same processes and expect different results over and over again, when nothing really changes, especially to the material conditions that people are experiencing, that it's like, it's so easy for people to come in and be like, oh, here's the answer, and we need to do it this way and this way. And it doesn't hold as much nuance, but also like it must be addressed that anytime these types of tactics are falling in within what is viewed as polite and respectable to the state, that often they're not going to be moving the needle as much. That's just the truth of it, because they want to control the end result.
An attitude towards making music has...
Oh, I'm also going to speed this up as I do, just to get to more things today.
Has changed. Your attitude towards celebration of violence has changed. You said the N-word has changed. I think at one point in the book you say no truly self-loving people can celebrate their own death. Is there at times a danger of sort of lapsing into reinforcing a binary between so-called conscious and I guess unconscious rap, and then thinking about how that maps onto politics?
Yeah, I don't see that separation. I mean, Tupac is quite possibly the greatest gangster rapper of all time and the greatest conscious rapper of all time. And I don't see this celebration of violence, let's be clear, as an innate, uniquely black negative. Korean revenge cinema is very, very violent. Korea is a very peaceful country. I can watch every Italian mafia film, as I have done, and not come out thinking that all Italian people are in the mafia. If people listen to rap music and it drives them to believe that every young black boy sells crack and shoots people, that's their own stupidity. That's not rappers' fault. And I think we're even seeing now, with Krypton Conan opening that ice cream shop, with gigs on his Instagram, spending more time on his Instagram posing with his daughter than anything else, right? We're seeing that what happens when young black men from the hood get some money, naturally it changes them, and not even in a negative way. When your material, so just in case it's not clear, when I was talking about my friends wanting to improve their material life, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's a perfectly legitimate desire in life. I suppose what I am saying, that doesn't mean that all poor people are Marxists, is the point I was trying to make. Not that it's wrong for poor people to want the norms of middle class life. Who doesn't want to have a comfortable life? Who wants to spend 12 hours a day working and have nothing to show for it at the end of 50 years in the factory or wherever it may be? But yeah, I definitely think another thing that's changed is as I've got older, I've felt that a lot of middle-class black outrage, so-called gangster rap, for example, is more about middle-class black people wanting to look respectable, because every other culture celebrates violence. And if you're arguing that it's going to make us look bad, what you're doing is you're normalizing the white gaze. You're saying it's going to make us look bad to who? Middle-class white people don't say, oh, you know, Danny Dyer makes us look bad, right?
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? So it's still them
An
refusing to
internalized
interrogate
white
why
gaze.
they think a white audience is not intelligent enough to know the difference between the black underclass and black people that are not part of the underclass, for example.
But it's also a case of, 10 years later, 15 years later, things get, I guess, defanged. So what's interesting to me is that people who would have been terrified of NWA when they first came out are now praising NWA as conscious rap. Similarly with Giggs, I was reading this terrible article in the Telegraph about drill, and suddenly Giggs was being held up as this elder, sensible statesman, as if he, hadn't caught one.
But even with me, I think
About drill rap. Wanting to see, okay, English. This is like one of the things I was wanting to see if they had like American English or like British English. This is one of the things that Linton brought up a little bit ago of how like AI can't even really tell between accents that are British versus like American dialects, and how it's like, oh, this is revealing the fact who owns these platforms, who owns this type of AI, who they're wanting to include or not.
a lot of middle class, this doesn't happen with young black boys. One of the reasons I'm respected, whether people like it or not, is everyone knows how I grew up and what I was on and what my friends were on.
Historically,
It's different.
AI does not, and auto captions, which is a form of AI, these generated captions do not pick up on AAVE especially.
Gigs that some people would like to believe. Difference is Gigs went to prison as a teenager and I didn't.
African American vernacular
English.
English.
From under the mattress and we was on the road. I'm not who they might want to. It's easy. One of the reasons I confessed to a lot of this stuff in the book, a lot of stuff my mum did not know, right? And there's some stuff that we left out because we had to, right? But it's because I don't want people to put me on this pedestal as the unique Negro. Look at him. Why can't you all be like him? I ain't that different, fam. I am not suggesting I'm in some innately moral, wonderful human. When my life was shit, or at least I felt it was shit, I behaved in some very shit ways. My life's good. I no longer behave in those ways. Neither does Gigs. Gigs ain't gonna go out on the road tomorrow and be like, you know what? Even though my life's great and I'm on tour and I'm very well off now, you know what would make this all better? Going back to prison. He's not dumb enough to make that decision. Do you know what I mean? I know him personally. So I don't think people should try and make this big separation. Carla, the good black guy who reads all the books, isn't he wonderful? I was reading books when I was 15 and I was carrying a knife and I was in the black bookshop with my brethren and my oldest. So yeah, one of the main points I'm trying to make is that I am not that different from these young boys out here. In fact, ironically, there's loads of black boys I grew up with who weren't about this life. And me and my friends kind of looked at them as soft. And it's only when I got to 21, 22 where I was like, nah, I'm not on it no more. I'm not in it. And a lot of my brethren, I think, did say, right, like, you've lost it. Now, 10 years later, after 10 years of being in and out of jail, and one of my best friends got deported, he was in England since he was 2. He was a naughty lad. People are saying, no, actually, maybe you made a good decision, but I shouldn't be separated from other street black youths to make middle-class people feel good. I'm not that different from them.
I think that sense of a refusal to pander to the white gaze, I think either through sensationalising violence or through kind of, rejecting it and separating yourself off was something that really came across in the book to me. The other thing that came across was just how very, very British it is, and in particular, very, very North London, which absolutely made my heart sing. So I've got 2 questions for you on that. One, why is it that all you Ackland Burley boys were such heartbreakers growing up?
No, I ain't taking credit for the rest of them. I don't know.
Oh my God, no, you 100% were. It would take like an Ackland Burley boy would like completely fuck your heart up, and you would need like a Northumberland Park boy to fix it. That was how it was.
Northumberland Park? Nah, that man was way worse than we were. I'm not having that.
I'm not familiar with all of the aspects of London, of like the various neighborhoods and like all of the generalizing that happens there, of like what they're talking about here, but this banter is fun.
But Ackland Burley boys were like a little bit hipster, so they'd mess you around a bit more.
Yeah, maybe, but that wasn't I can't take, Burley was a much more mixed school than say Northumberland Park or D&K so my set was, I spent much more of my childhood in Tottenham or Hackney or Housing than I did in Camden. This is one of the things I talk about in the book. In a weird way, it's like I gravitated to where my cousins lived and where my friends lived because of that sort of isolation of, going to a school with a lot of middle-class white kids and poor white kids, but then getting to a point in my mid-teens where I felt like I could no longer relate and sort of like self-ghettoizing and then kind of vacating Camden for Tottenham.
I mean, and I guess the other thing I wanted to ask about that is, because it feels so rooted in North London, so rooted in a British diaspora experience, do you ever think that as anti-racists in this country, we're a bit too reliant on an American model of understanding racism?
I very much, I think for African Caribbeans in particular, and I've only started to realise this in the last 5 years, that can be one of the dangers. We love our black American cousins. Malcolm is on the wall, Martin is on the wall, Muhammad is on the wall. But in a way, the British state,
This is such a great conversation, especially when it comes to empires rising and falling of the US. Many people, I think, like parts of culture or like hearing even British accents, people tend to have like mommy daddy issues and are like, oh, they're smarter. But also how it cannot be understated the amount of propaganda that the US has exported of American culture that predominantly is created and built by Black Americans, Indigenous Americans. So like this is a necessity to be discussing, and I just love that this conversation is happening.
Think about how many great documentaries the BBC have done on the civil rights movement, on Malcolm X, on Martin Luther King, and almost a way of saying, look at these wonderful Black Americans, and look how racist America is, and look how much they've done over their Black people. You talk to most Black people in Britain even, they'll know the Alabama church bombing, they won't know New Cross. And so one of the points I'm trying to make in this is not that that's wrong that we know about what's happening in America. It's the center of the empire. It's the center of world politics at the moment, or at least believes it is. But one of the dangers is sort of othering
Believes
the British struggle,
it is.
and that being sort of secondary importance. So I do think it's very, very important that we are as familiar with Stuart Hall as we are with Toni Morrison or Angela Davis. And at the moment we're not. We all know a Toni Morrison or Angela Davis, but we won't know a Stuart Hall or a Gilroy or Gus John or a Claudia Jones. And those are equally important because our situation, as I've said, is quite different. Very similar, but also very, very different.
What are the specific things that you think make the British situation different?
Well, the lack of formal apartheid. It meant that the British government had to try and achieve the outcomes of apartheid without having those legal mechanisms of actual segregation, and never really actually aimed to achieve the same things that America had. One of the things post-war British governments were really concerned about was the creation of actual black ghettos in Britain, because they felt that was too troublesome. So they did want a degree of assimilation. They didn't want to appear to be too racist, so they wanted to restrict Commonwealth migration on racial grounds, but then felt that the black people that were here, it would be too embarrassing to treat them as badly as they were being treated in America or Australia or Southern Africa. And so that subtleness of British racism is why a lot of people think you're going over the top when you say police battered people in my family. People think you're just making it up to sound cool. But if they talk to Irish people over 50, they'll find similar stories. In fact, the Irish story, in a way, in post-war Britain shows exactly what I'm talking about. The Irish in America by then had very much become white. They were not really accepted until the mid-90s after the Good Friday Agreement. When I was growing up, Irish people in Kilburn getting battered by the police was still very, very normal. And so it's all of those different nuances, but mainly the fact of living in a neighborhood that is not segregated. My business partner is from Vanderveer Projects in New York. And when she grew up, there were literally 0 white people in her neighborhood or in her class. In fact, 0 non-black people. There is nowhere in Britain that is quite like that. Maybe Handsworth, maybe. And that's Caribbean and Asian even. Do you see what I mean? So it's not even like, there is nowhere where there's that complete level of spatial segregation. And that just creates a slightly different environment, a slightly different analysis. And also having that direct connection to the Caribbean or West Africa, to majority black polities, is very different from being essentially isolated in America and severed from, even though there's been migration from the Caribbean into America, severed from those connections to those places. And so there are similarities, but there are big differences that I think have to be wrestled with. And now we're coming more of cultural confidence. None of this is divorced from popular culture. Now we're coming more into our own. I think we're going to start analysing those things even more.
One final question. The year is 2022.
Yep.
We have a Labour government. I'm off in Ibiza somewhere getting munted. And Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn approaches you and says, you can suggest one single policy to significantly improve the conditions of people of colour in this country. What would you offer up?
Probably what I would suggest, and I'll just say this publicly now because it is what it is, but I've been working with lots of different groups of young people for a while in the ends, and trying to look at what solutions there can be to some of the problems with serious youth violence and things of that nature. And one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea of setting up community-run boarding schools. And so the logic for that is very, very simple. Despite what we're reading in the press, so for example, in London, the percentage of black people in London that actually kill someone in any given year is less than 0.005%. Yeah, so there's over 1 million black people in London, there's always less than 50 murders in the community. So actually, even though there are definitely big problems, it's interesting the way those are being spun as if blackness is a sufficient common denominator. What's happening is the underclass within the black underclass is being used as a weapon against the people who are the primary victims of their crimes. The other 99% of black people who don't kill anybody are being held ethnically responsible. 47% of all the people in Britain's prisons were expelled from school as children. 24% were in the care system at some point. So the British government, the state, the Department for Education, the police themselves, if you read their own reports, understand very, very well what the common denominators are and what the predictors are for crime or later attraction to violent crime. That's as true in Glasgow or Liverpool as it is in London. So the rationale was saying, well, if these young boys who get expelled at 12 end up in a PRU and then end up causing problems later on, if they were removed and put on a farm in Cambridge, but with people who understand them, I don't mean middle-class missionaries.
Yep, the system's creating this.
I mean, the man them go out to Cambridge with them, olders,
Functioning
train
as they
them,
were built
you know,
to.
you swim in the lake, you get that. What it does, it achieves two things, is the argument. On the one hand, it tries to work with the group most at risk of causing problems, going to jail, being violent, etc. On the other hand, the other 99% of kids in Hackney or Tower Hamlets or Brixton or wherever else, who actually just want to go to school and get their grades and get a job despite being poor, they're freed from the burden of the young people who've been less fortunate than them, not just economically, but in terms of their family circumstances and everything else. So that would probably be, I think that would probably be the policy that I would suggest.
It seems remarkably fleshed out considering I just chucked this question at you out of nowhere.
No, it's been something I've been thinking about quite a lot. Now, look at it like this, it's significantly more expensive to send a kid to prison than it is to send them to Eton. So we're perfectly fine to subsidise young poor kids to be in the countryside. We just prefer they were in the countryside in a prison. And so even for people on the right, I'm expecting, hopefully, when these ideas get suggested, lots of support on the grounds that it's economically more efficient, if nothing else. And so, yeah, the money is there, and it's whether the political will is there to say we'd rather repair the damage than add to it. If you've got a larger prison population, you've got more people growing up with parents in prison, you've got more people who go to prison. And Britain, incidentally, has the largest prison population in the whole of Western Europe right now, and we've got people who want to grow it. So that is probably the main solution I would suggest to achieving many of those outcomes: saving the taxpayer money, lowering serious youth violence, stopping allowing the black underclass being used as a weapon against the other 99% of black people, promoting education. There are so many things that we feel a policy like that properly implemented, not as a means to spy on.
For a minute, I thought he was going to say that Britain had the largest incarcerated population in the world, and I was like, Sadly, that's where I'm at. That's in the US.
Young people, which is what it could end up being used for. But as a means to seriously work with young people and repair some of the various damages that are in their life is a policy I would suggest.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you. And yeah, Prime Minister Jez, get on it.
Amazing. Such a great find by Linton. Thank you very much, Linton, as usual, for the great content. Also, I do have to call out how I did my makeup is not even whatsoever on any aspect. The eyes, the eyebrows, the mustache, the lips, all are not even cousins or sisters. That's what they say in like queer spaces with makeup of like sisters, not twins. They aren't even cousins. This is like the neighbor down the block from the other neighbor down the block. Anyway, just had to call that out. All right, so here is this video that I was talking about yesterday that FD Signifier created. This is on his channel, Signified B-Sides. And he is talking about Graham Plattner specifically. And as we were talking about yesterday, that there are a lot of people that, particularly when it comes to white leftists, supposed leftists, these edgelords, that are coming after FD for being like, you shouldn't be criticizing Graham Plattner for these reasons. It's like, okay, yes, Graham Plattner is getting a lot of criticism from the right, from fascists, but I'm not a leftist, by the way. Oh yeah, that's fine. Cool. Glad to have you here. Do you have any sort of like identifying ideology for yourself, which, like, as we were just talking about, you don't have to, and sometimes that is helpful to have more of a well-rounded look on the world. But I think it's good to actually listen to what FD Signifier has to say and listen to the very valid criticism that he has about Graham Plattner. And it's not even just Graham Plattner himself, it's also what he represents and how people are presenting themselves as, or presenting him as being this savior of American politics, this white savior complex that just continues over and over again. And how we can't just be perpetuating the same kinds of politics and systems that have continued to fail us over and over again. It usually seems to be like these edgelords who are also very invested in electoralism. And there are many people who do not believe in the power of electoralism as much. It still affects our material conditions, who is elected into office, but also, like, we can't be looking to electoral politics as the thing that is going to be the saving mechanism, and the people who are engaging in it should not be revered in a way that they have not necessarily earned, especially when we have not seen how they will act when in positions of power. And it's good to be criticizing people. Bottom center. I'm looking for ideological reasons to be rowdy these days, as I've grown out of being a party gal who simply wants chaos for the sake of chaos. That's fair. That's also, I think, many people who are first attracted to anarchism. It can be kind of like that sentiment, especially if you're attracted to anarchism as a young person. I didn't necessarily have that route. I think I've kind of come around to it as like, oh, these types of incrementalism, like with electoralism, like are not always going to be the best liberating force. And there are people who are needing liberation now, people who are in prisons, people who are being genocided, people who are being trafficked and in these detainment centers where it's like, okay, there needs to be more immediate action and answers. As a youth, I'd commit to direct action as an excuse to rally people when I wanted to either hurt my fellow man or steal their stuff. That's a really interesting exercise, though, like, and like a good thing to be reflecting on, of like, to be actually analyzing why you're engaging in certain kinds of behavior, that it's coming from a place that's more about rage, which cannot be underestimated, of like, that's a valid emotion, or like wanting to be destructive in certain ways, like that doesn't come from nowhere, you know. But also, like, if it is applied in a way that has more like organization to it, how that can often be like a better use of like time and resources. These days I'm more mature. Wait, I can just do whatever the fuck I want? We were very different as teenagers. I also, but like having grown up Mormon in a very like religious, conservative household that was like very restrained, and me being afraid of authority and like being in trouble in any sort of way, then also like being in situations where it's like, oh, you're hurt even if you aren't in trouble, whatever that means. So might as well resist. I try to be self-aware. Good. Yeah, and I think you even being able to like understand that concept of like your progression, that is really important. You were afraid of authority. You should have made authority afraid of you. I mean, honestly, yeah. But deconstructing a lot of that shit is hard work, in being like, oh, if I'm like, it's not just about like, if I'm obedient in certain ways, that doesn't mean that I'm like not going to be harmed. You know, like even understanding that concept of having it not be like a reflection on you, of like internalizing the structures and being like part of the problem, where like you're some of like one of the biggest advocates for your own oppression, where you're like, oh, I just didn't do this, so I make authority bend to my demands. Petite bourgeois. I gain the trust and loyalty of my peers, then rule over them. Interesting. Yeah, that kind of concept is interesting, of like, why are people looking to certain people as leaders or not? And a lot of the time, like whether it's, if it's not through a very like democratically elected type of situation, and like in the actual sense of people like being like, oh, we're choosing this leader, we're taking a vote on this or something, a lot of the time it's like a reflection of like the larger structures that people are in. Always richer than them. Yeah. So like proximity to wealth and capital, and whether it's whiteness, straightness, cisness, maleness. Wow. It sounds like you have some stories to tell. That is very interesting. That power corrupts or attracts corrupted people, and I was corrupt. I think when I was younger, I could be attracted to power, and largely that was because I felt very disempowered in many aspects of my life. So like being like very bossy with like some of my friends, and like looking at myself as a leader in that way, but that it was like a way for me to practice, or I thought like more autonomy in the very little amount that I had in these spaces, where it really was just like a larger issue in me not having as much autonomy within society itself. But I have since, like, since this time, and like learning from a lot of those situations, being like, I am not really attracted to power at all. And it can be scary. I would much rather just like be on the outside and like criticizing things, providing a critical voice, like working together with people where I feel like there's common ground, and then seeing where that goes. You have so many stories because of family hierarchy. Well, I mean, that probably also is like a motivation for it, of like, if you feel like you don't have autonomy in your everyday life, of like wanting to have some sort of power in situations. So I think it makes sense. Okay, I did want to watch this video by FD Signifier talking about things. I do need to step out for just a sec. I'm gonna get some more water, but I'm going to keep this playing. I'll do this again at higher speed because this is what we do here. It's a motivation. I didn't think of that. Yeah, I think that's honestly where a lot of people's like inclinations, no matter like what it may be, a lot of the time it's like a reflection of their circumstances and not having power, and whether it's like a way that is like internalized or externalized in ways that can be more like harmful, that it's a way for people to feel like they have control of some sort of sense of their lives.
I'm putting all white leftists on timeout until further notice. I've been hanging around y'all.
I should have refreshed this. And this reaction, like him saying this, I think is completely fair. I mean, not like my say even matters, you know? It's like, especially with everything that he has been experiencing with all of these people on the left, these white leftists, supposed leftists, that I think it's okay for him to be having these kinds of boundaries. Like, I've seen this video before, but he will talk about how he didn't start out wanting to create content for white people, that he primarily was starting out creating content for Black people, and that there is a huge disconnect when it comes to people just watching him in sound bites rather than engaging with his content, because it's not centering white people.
I'm putting all white leftists on timeout until further notice. I've been hanging around y'all too long, and now I have lice. And Black people shouldn't get lice. That it doesn't work like that for us. Lice in America cannot survive in Black hair. Y'all probably don't realize that because a lot of y'all don't be knowing shit about us, but we already off topic, and the fact that I'll be explaining Black people shit is kind of why I have this problem in the first place. We're going to start out talking Graham Plattner a little bit because he's a great framing tool for everything I want to get off my chest. I want to be really clear. I'm going to say that a lot in this video. I don't like this dude. He feels like a seasonal villain from a prestige political drama like House of Cards or Scandal or something. I'm not saying he's a Nazi, but he's at least like Hydra or Order of the Cyclops for those of you that watched Watchmen all those years ago. He just is that guy, and it's incredibly obvious to anyone who isn't some of y'all. And this isn't just taking issue with his military service. I don't have a purity politic toward anything, really, if you know me, but definitely not ex-military people on the left. I am anti-American military. Like, I don't want to misconstrue that. But there are also Black Panthers who are ex-military. The American military spends billions of dollars marketing and propagandizing young people across this country, so I try to hold a nuanced position for how that works. But I wouldn't apply this to Plattner. 4 tours and Blackwater and a Nazi tattoo is a lot, and I know that's not a hot take. I know even more moderate folks would agree with that, so I have to wonder why and how is Plattner being pushed so hard by the establishment and the online left in general. Plattner is the latest project out of the Fight Agency. The Fight Agency is a political consultancy that was started by some ex-Bernie Sanders, ex-John Fetterman folks, and in recent years they've been behind the success of Zohran Mamdani, as well as people like Dan Osborne, Bob Brooks, etc. And aside from Zohran Mamdani, you kind of see what's happening here. All we're missing is Hank Hill. Like, the main, mostly valid argument that I will get about Plattner is that he's one of the few folks amongst the Democrats that vows to pull military support from Israel.
Not a single taxpayer dollar should be spent on arming and defending a country that commits a genocide.
And that is extremely important for Palestinian liberation. But I do have to ask, why are we being asked to not just tolerate Plattner for that reason, but to see him almost as the future of the Democratic Party and maybe even the left? Why has he become the darling of the online, predominantly white left in this time frame? Why did the Fight Agency scout him in the first place? It's because the Fight Agency knows that this image of white American exceptionalism and especially masculinity is still highly valued amongst the white masses. He's doing a reskin of the Marlboro Man, or better yet, like Don Draper, Joel Miller from The Last of Us. Literally, he looks like Walter White. And I want you to remember, all of these characters were villains. And historically, it's always straight white men that fail to realize that fact about those characters. And when you're not a straight white male, you always take note of those types of fans. They may not be the worst people in the world, but there are people to observe. But the left falling for the same trick like this is not surprising when you realize that white leftists in America have never consistently had a halfway decently developed racial analysis. And this is just a historical pattern at this point. Again, shout out to a book I've been reading from Brian Koba, Hubert Harrison, The Forbidden Genius of Black Radicalism. Hubert Harrison was a lesser known black socialist who worked and wrote in the same eras as Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, and Garvey, and was to the left of all of them during that time, including Du Bois. But in this, he also found himself confounded by the challenge of organizing with white socialists who at the time could not see past their anti-blackness to form effective solidarity and build a functional coalition. And this pattern has never stopped repeating, which is illustrated by this excerpt from Eugene Debs that's in the book. In capitalism, the Negro question is a grave one and will grow more threatening as the contradictions and complications of capitalist society multiply, Debs allowed. But this need not worry us. Let them settle the Negro question in their way if they can. We have nothing to do with it, for that is their fight. Debs here exemplified the way in which even radical white people who called for a working class revolution against capitalism could simultaneously distance themselves from the specific challenges facing the most oppressed segment of the working class. I'm bringing this up because I want to show that this is an infinite loop at this point. White leftists with little to no racial analytical frame can't help but censor their sensibilities even in the face of obvious red flags, or clearly better options if they don't appeal to their aesthetics and need to censor themselves. Why have we centered Graham Plattner when we have Chris Robb, who from what I understand is the furthest left candidate the Democrats have ever had in any political race? And he low-key still fits the gruff leftist daddy kink that so many of y'all seem to like. Another face that I haven't seen on my feed at all and I had to get from somebody else is Charles Booker. Booker has as progressive an agenda as you can have in mainstream politics and is in a very vulnerable red state that could use a lot more attention and support from the online left. And it's not there. Booker's not just anti-sending weapons to Israel. He's Medicare for all. He's for universal basic income, stopping data centers, decriminalizing poverty, and reparations. Is everything you can want from a mainstream politician, but he's invisible compared to Plattner. I don't follow elections much unless it's local, but I have seen Plattner's face a million times more than either Rob or Booker. Rob did spend some time with Hassan. Booker, he's got nothing as far as I can tell. Meanwhile, Plattner has tons of interviews, Majority Report, Mehdi Hassan, New York Times. Why is this happening? Why is that viable? From my perspective and experience, a lot of white leftists understand that it's bad to be racist, but they don't actually understand why racism is bad or how it works. The absence of a critical understanding of how whiteness works is why a lot of them fall for the same trick over and over, to the point where the fight agency clearly has this type built out just for y'all. If you want to vote for Plattner as an odious candidate that will help end military support to Israel, go ahead, but it should be treated as a tainted compromise for the sake of a free Palestine, not a vision for the future of the left. He should not be in our faces as much as he is. He should not have the defenders that he has that I know will show up in his comment section. He should be the online left's sneaky link that you never see in the light of day and never talk about in public. And the fact that so many white leftists don't feel this is sadly par for the course. The red flags that he has don't bother some of y'all because those red flags have never been weaponized against you. But when you're someone who's historically been targeted by this archetype, you pay attention to those patterns. You don't compromise with that. For reasons I won't get into, I've had to spend the last few weeks arguing that normalizing Nazi terminology but wokely is bad and that no one on the left should be doing it. And I've had some, not many, I want to be clear, but plenty of white leftists try to argue that nobody cares about Nazis, as if a couple of Nazis didn't just shoot up a mosque in San Diego just a few weeks ago, or the fact that that exact type of Nazi terrorism happens like every 6 to 18 months in America. And it's impossible to remain in community or struggle with people who don't seem to mind that, who always put themselves first, especially when the struggle isn't about them in the first place. And after half a decade online, I'm tired of seeing this pattern and repeating these same complaints. But the problem is that this entire
Okay, I'm back. I did. Just as a quick interruption. Sorry, FD. This will be quick, I promise. I got more colors. So for people who are subscribed, you can request some colors and a bracelet, and I will make it for you. Probably childish, but also, I'll admit, I think it's a little bit sweet. But no pressure. So I'm going to be making a bracelet for Tanvir the Great.
Has always catered to a specific type of white guy online, and that's what it was built for and what it always probably will be. See, BreadTube emerged as a venue to rehabilitate right-wing edgelords into leftist progressives, all after the rise of the alt-right. It has always had an extremely high tolerance for what Graham Plattner is, because he's just like them for real. And while not every aspect of BreadTube has catered to this reformed edgelord Reddit troll archetype, it's clear that this element of the space remains influential and often sets the tone for the space, because even if these types don't make up the largest part of our audiences, they're almost always the loudest part, always the most online and the most active of the bunch. So let's talk about some drama for a bit. For years, I have not responded to drama publicly. And any drama from other creators whose opinions I don't care about, you haven't heard me talk about it publicly. And the reason for this is people don't care. People don't care about petty squabbles between creators that agree with each other 90% of the time. None of this is really material to any useful action toward a free Palestine or any social issue that you might care about. So rarely do I dedicate time to it in a serious sense. Some creators thrive off drama. and they can't attract an audience otherwise. I am not one of those creators. So I want to apologize up front to the vast majority of people who will watch this and have no clue where this is coming from. But with that in mind, I won't be naming names. And to be clear, a lot of the things I'm going to say aren't going to be intended explicitly towards a few people. And it's more so me responding to a problem I've been seeing forever in the space as a whole. But before I even go there, let me clarify some things. I am unequivocally a supporter of a free Palestine. I see Palestine as a colonized nation. And no, I do not think Israel has a right to exist because it is an imperial project and cannot exist as anything but an imperial project. I do not even condemn Hamas. And I've had this stance on decolonization for years. If you pay attention, I don't know if this is a shocking thing to hear me say. It's only that probably if you haven't been paying attention. But a lot of y'all only, we'll get there. You cannot put limitations on how colonized people fight their oppressors. So no.
Yes, this is something that he has been saying for a very long time consistently. And why it's like, it's just, it's so important that we are having this be said, that FD has been saying this for years and years along with other people, but it also is like tying into this larger conversation, like what I've been talking about with Pride, of like, if you are, and like with Palestine, people experiencing the racial targeting and ethnic cleansing of immigrants, particularly Latina immigrants and Black immigrants in the US, where there is this knee-jerk reaction by even people who consider themselves to be leftists, who are allies when it comes to the cause, that it's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing whatever to ICE and cops who are actively brutalizing protesters, actively brutalizing people who are kidnapped and trafficked to these centers. That, like, who are you to say? If you are not experiencing these conditions, then, like, you should not have a fucking say in how people overthrow their oppressors, because, like, you don't have that personal experience. So
I won't condemn Hamas the same way I wouldn't condemn the Mau Maus in Kenya or the Nat Turner slave rebellions or the Haitian Revolution or the IRA in Ireland. All of these entities were called terrorists at the time of their existence by their oppressors, and all are recognized as liberation movements today, despite the ugliness those movements may have existed in. And I believe Hamas will eventually be seen in the same light. I would love if violence didn't have to occur, and there are anti-colonial movements that do happen to occur with minimal violence, but it's not fair to call any anti-colonial violence senseless, because it is a direct response to the condition that the colonized are living under. And the thing to keep in mind is that Palestinians didn't just start getting genocided by Israel on October 7, 2023. Now, I've seen people say that I've said nothing about the genocide in 3 years. And those people do not watch me. I've expressed my support for Palestine in multiple videos across multiple channels. One thing I'm really interested in with Palestine right now is because there's very obviously bad faith actors trying to involve themselves on all sides of the issue. Oh shit, it's 4,000 people in here. What the fuck? Let's talk about Palestine, motherfuckers. There are students across the country at college campuses protesting and putting their personal lives and futures in jeopardy for free Palestine. There are professors getting arrested and detained right up the street from where I live at this point, Emory University. Limbaugh's a racist. Glenn Beck is a racist. Gaza Strip was getting bombed. Obama didn't say shit. Did Lupe Fiasco, one of the biggest rappers in the world, low-key say free Palestine way back in 2011? Yes, he did. But my content is made for Black people, and the people I'm talking about usually are not Black. And so some of these newfound critics will just lie and say I've been silent, and this is being used to paint me as a person who is both sizing a genocide or a liberal Zionist or a Philo-Semite. I have very purposely never presented myself as a key voice on Palestine, which I don't think anyone sincerely is asking me for, but that has allowed for, I'll say, unprincipled people to make up narratives about my position when I dare to say something as bold as,
Hey, maybe don't use Nazi dog whistles because you had a disagreement with someone on Twitter.
and instead of acknowledging that reasonable and extremely low bar of decency
Yep.
in this space, folks would rather accuse me of being a liberal Zionist. And I think the only reason
I think this is the situation that Linton was referring to yesterday, of him calling out people, or calling out Bad Empanada specifically, and using Nazi dog whistles. Yeah. Even if you are for Palestinian liberation, it does not give you the excuse to be anti-Semitic. That it's like, we have to be for humanity. We have to be for humans, human-centered, because all of these systems that we are existing within, especially these colonial projects, settler colonialism, racism, this anti-Blackness, sexism, queerphobia, ableism, that like all of these things exist as deeply anti-human, and that it is a radical thing to do to actually view each other as human beings. As I'm like in the same breath calling police pigs. But I mean, it also is like, they are not viewing us as human beings. So like the resistance to that perspective should be met with that.
why this FD doesn't care about Palestine narrative has gotten legs, because I didn't make a definitive FD signifier Palestine video on my main channel. And some may see that as a lack of conviction, so let me clear that up as well. First, I want to engage with this idea that a video on Palestine would have been bad for my channel in some form or fashion. And this is just not based in reality. In fact, the opposite is true. Palestine videos, especially 2 years ago, were very popular. Sean's Palestine video...
Yeah, he just hasn't been opportunistic, I feel. I feel like it's come from a very genuine place of him actually talking about how he is not an expert, that he is not claiming to be, but also that, like, regularly, especially if you watch his streams, watch his content regularly, you will hear him talk about Palestine.
Years ago is the second most watched video of the last 5 years. And even today, videos on the genocide can pull in good views. You never know how the algorithm is going to treat when you talk about certain topics. There's definitely, shadow banning, and there's definitely certain ways that you talk about the genocide that will get a video demonetized.
I do not even condemn Hamas.
But it's like that for a lot of stuff. And there's definitely a market for content around Palestine. And to me, that's kind of gross, but it's the reality. This clip that is being spread to insinuate that I'm purposely avoiding making content about Palestine is literally me making content about Palestine because it's featuring Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, and it's the most watched video on my podcast channel. There was and is still great benefit for people to make pro-Palestinian content, especially white creators who love to jump in front of any trending social issue to be the face of it. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't do that shit. I have a different relationship and view of left tube and political content than many viewers and a lot of creators. I stopped viewing BreadTube as a space for serious political content, low-key almost immediately, but definitely after I made the Fuck the Police video back in like mid-2023. Fuck the Police was probably the first video I made where I wasn't already somewhat of an expert on the topic. I had to do more reading and research for that video than any video before it. I interviewed legitimate experts on the topic. I interviewed former inmates, and it ended up being a really, really great, highly informative video. I was so proud of how that video came out initially, but almost immediately upon its release, I felt bad about what I'd actually done. I had made this ostensibly radical piece of media and released it as a commercial product on a giant multinational data mining platform so they could advertise AI girlfriends and PragerU in between me talking about political prisoners and black revolutionaries. It's just felt gross. Further, in the aftermath, I was somehow branded as a prison reform expert. Like, I remember having people reach out to me to platform me and pay me to consult with them on prison abolition. Meanwhile, BP, who I interviewed as not only a former prisoner themselves, but also worked to shut down prisons before.
Just seeing your comment, Aliana. Wearing Hawaiian shirts, roasting pigs like it's luau. Ask the hood. Who's the killer? They say, who's now? Shot so impressed. Ops say, oh wow, feed his fucking body to my dogs. They be like, who is that? Do tell. I love that. As I've been even more vocal about my feelings about cops and the systems that they protect, it's Aliana. And you're trying to claim that you aren't an artist? Excuse me. That's rude. To you and me. Yeah, keep writing that shit. I love that. You should write something, continue to write something, and I mean, this is Culture Corner. I'm going to be saving this. I really like what you are saying here. With your consent, would you be all right with me saving this? Credited to you. Yeah, do what you need to do. But yeah, with me being more open about my feelings about cops and like calling them pork, like even in some posts, there are people that are not happy with me. And it's very entertaining because people who are normally like, oh, we can work with everyone, with being for certain types of resistance, except when it comes to talking about cops in a way that is accurate. Let's be honest.
BP hadn't even hit 10K on their own channel at the time. So at the end of the day, I was using BP's work and expertise and experience for my video, and they weren't receiving adequate credit for what I had done. It felt like I was doing the types of things I had always criticized other, mostly white content creators of doing with black people, because the same thing happened during the Black Lives Matter uprisings in 2021. And at that point, I decided I wasn't going to make any serious political content unless I had something really unique to add to the greater discussion, not because there was a demand for it from a commercial audience. And after that video, I mostly stopped making explicitly political content. Aside from a video highlighting the student protest against Palestine and a media analysis video on black cops, I didn't make a real politics video for over a year on my channel. And even when I returned to politics, it was for videos where I thought I had something unique to say, like me making the Hotep video, which nobody my size should be making a Hotep video. I'm also the only channel of my size who's been openly skeptical of Zohran Mamdani, and even that video was also a fundraiser for an org fighting for Palestine and against a cop city in Buffalo, New York. I'm not saying this is right.
And it's
I'm not saying
valid
this is how everyone should be,
criticisms.
but for me,
The white leftist sentiment and mentality of wanting to put people on pedestals without engaging in this larger discussion of how we need to actually see what they will do, what their track records are like, that one person in a position of power in this system that is inherently anti-human because it's built off of genocide and stolen land and slavery and all of these types of marginalization that have been perpetuated throughout history, that it's like we must be continuing with outside pressure as well.
If you're a larger creator who got big because of pop culture and mostly non-political stuff, which was the case for me, the move isn't to suddenly try to take up space as an historian on a topic you aren't an expert in. Instead, you should be offering support directly and then intertwine Palestine into the type of content you already make. So that's what I did. And people that watch me know this. Could I have done more? Yes. I think anyone that tells you they did everything they could have these past couple of years is a liar. But I did not foresee a future where not having made a specific video will be weaponized against me in this way. So I stuck with my principles and how I perceive this medium and this platform. And maybe naively, I figured most people would be normal about it. Like, I could go on forever. There's a whole extra bread tube ain't shit critique video that I probably can do right now because of how this medium incentivizes grifting and bad faith behavior. And the audience doesn't realize that they're more concerned about their own parasocial relationships with creators than the issue the creator is talking about. But all this said, I recently realized something regarding the genocide that I felt was useful, and I started researching for it to make a video. And in doing that research, I had to start rearranging my preconceived notions around the topic. For example, I had mostly up until this point framed Zionism as an intrinsically white supremacist concept. And this is not illogical to do. White supremacy is the dominant framework of imperialism worldwide. Zionism comes from Europe. The inhumanity that Zionists partake in looks exactly like the humanity that white supremacists have shown people of color since colonialism started. But then I began to encounter Jewish supremacy, and I imagined that that is a term that to the average person sets off alarm bells, because in Western culture and media, the term Jewish supremacy is mostly prominent amongst neo-Nazis. And even I, for a second, was taken aback by the term, especially since I had been seeing other creators sound more like 4chan trolls than leftists for the last couple of months. Thankfully, I had peers who knew more than me and introduced me to scholarship from actual Palestinians to clarify the concept. For anyone who wants to know more, I think Mohammed El-Kur's book, Perfect Victims, is a great place to start because it's not written as a piece of academic scholarship, so anyone can really understand it. If you want something more academic, I'll link a great article from the Journey of Holy Land and Palestinian Studies that explicitly bridges the gap between Jewish supremacy and white supremacy. And I'll also add a work from Fayez Sayegh. I apologize if I got that name wrong. And that goes way back to 1965, illustrating the concept. The sad irony, though, is that the way I managed this learning experience going in to make this video has gotten me into drama. And now I have to address the drama to hopefully not distract from the actual video when I release it, hopefully later this month. A video I started on well before all this happened. I started researching more, which led to observations and learning, and that led to private conversations, which eventually turned into public content, and that public content turned into more public content, and that public content. And now I have to do this video before I finish that video so that that video can be seen and received as intended. And you wonder why I feel like this platform is not appropriate for serious political action. Now, I have to own that once I mention people by name publicly, even if for all of 20 seconds, even if it was on a puny channel that's not even connected to BreadTube, if you publicly critique someone, you open it up for them to respond. And if they want to make 50-11 videos about me, I say your name on the record, you get to make an hour-long video complaining about it. Get your bag, Kings. It is what it is. I got careless and forgot that I wasn't just a guy sitting with peers discussing a topic that I was trying to learn more about. Instead, I was FD signifier participating in the commercial enterprise that is YouTube political content. And the irony is I predicted in that video that drama was on the way because I know how a lot of these people move. Especially as your voice gets more respected and grows, the thing that is happening right now, as we say all these names, right? If this manages to break containment, you can expect 55 response videos, right? And it might sound like fun right now, Dr. Ball, the marriage of hate. But as a person who's been in that crucible, in the eye of that hurricane, it's not, and people, I've seen people in the chat be like, it's about money and numbers. No, it's the frustration of having your voice distorted, of having what you mean and what you're trying to say distorted, and you literally cannot fix it. I know that a lot of these white leftists have zero shame, zero self-awareness, and zero interest in actual coalition building on this platform if it means they might have to decenter themselves. And that brings me back to Plattner. Plattner is popular because he's BreadTube personified. He is the former edgelord rehabilitated into the hero for oppressed people to make up for his past sins. And mind you, every piece of anti-colonial liberation theory that you will ever read will tell you that the colonized must free themselves, but don't tell that to your favorite BreadTuber or favorite BreadTube fan, because they'll swear that it's them that's the key to liberation for insert other group here. But further, Plattner shows the failure of the American left presenting a principled anti-Zionist stance to a larger general public. I've noticed in my personal life and online that there's been a rise in what I'm going to describe as America First anti-Zionism. And normally when I make up a new term, I want credit for it, but please do not repeat. I'm positive there is somebody more worthy, some actual Palestinian scholar that is saying the exact same thing I'm saying. So find them and give them credit for that term. But Plattner is a perfect example of what that is, because while he does claim to want to stop aid from Israel, he also wants to improve military recruitment. So he is not against American imperialism like you might think, which undermines any anti-Israeli stance he holds. And that's typical of pretty much all the Democrats right now. The sad reality is that the Democratic Party and the alleged progressive leaders in America have allowed themselves to be outmaneuvered on Zionism by the likes of Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, unlike anti-Zionists on the left, are in fact obvious anti-Semites. Tucker Carlson is a crypto white supremacist who has spent years trying to normalize the Great Replacement theory and Marjorie Taylor Greene is a former QAnon adherent who brought us Jewish space lasers and believes in blood light. Yet both are being mainstreamed in a way that I wouldn't have thought possible just a few years ago. People like Carlson and Greene have infinitely more reach and influence than any of your favorite bread tubers, and thus they have been able to frontline this American first anti-Zionism, and it's become a popular position. It feels like for the first time ever, and this is a good thing, and I'll explain why in a second, anti-Zionism is a popular sentiment to hold, but anti-Zionism that is America first is letting America off the hook for its role in that genocide. I've had a lot of people, both online and in my encounters in real life, smart people, say something along the lines of, Israel is controlling America, and no, the tail does not wag the dog. Israel is a settler colonial project built on genocide and mass murder. America is a settler colonial project built on genocide and mass murder, among other things. Game, recognized game. There are, of course, Zionists in American government and plenty of Zionists who are at the helm of powerful American institutions. And our current president does seem uniquely compromised in his ability to not be influenced, not just by Israel, but everyone. Like, everybody gets a piece of our president. But please believe that confluence of power between Israel and Zionists in America is not some secret, like, mystical thing. That's just how power and capitalists have always worked. One example of this America first anti-Zionism is like, people often say America was forced or tricked into a war with Iran due to Israel, but this ignores the history of hostility America has had with Iran. Iran, as a sovereign, strong nation, has been able to withstand American influence and thus impedes on America's dominance of that region and the resources that Iran controls, even with Israel sitting at Iran's doorstep. And Israel, because of its Zionist nature, has always wanted to attack Iran, along with everyone else in that region for years, but for the longest, America has not allowed them to because most American presidents fully understood that we probably can't win a war with Iran, which, if you're paying attention, is clearly correct. But that doesn't mean that we didn't desire to do the exact same thing Israel did. This is why you see so many other American politicians wanting more action from America in Iran, low-key on both sides of the aisle. America has not just allowed, but has encouraged Israel to be exactly what it is for decades at this point. It's just that this time around, Palestinians were able to show the world what is happening to them. And I want to be clear, Palestinians do not care and should not care how they get free or who in America is going to bring them to that point. If they get free because of a right-wing regime ushered in by Tucker Carlson decides to act on their innate hatred of Jewish people and pull support from Israel, that's an us problem. That's not a them problem. There's a great short essay from Laif Marouf. Again, I apologize if I got that wrong. Where he's responding to a recent interview where Norm Finkelstein basically says exactly what I'm saying here. But Marouf comes back to reiterate that none of that is the Palestinians' concern. Marouf says literally, why is it so hard to believe that America first could actually be Israel last? So if the left, and by that I don't just mean us here on YouTube, although we are somewhat to blame, if the left can't present a crystal clear principle stance against Zionism to combat the nationalistic and ultimately fascist version that's taking a hold everywhere, including somewhat on the left, then we're fucked and we deserve it. So again, shout out to Chris Robb and Charles Booker, I guess. I'll leave some links on how to support them in the description. But the bottom line is, how we get anti-Zionism into our government is our business. If it takes hold in a way that is not good for black people, gay people, Muslims, etc., it's only good for these white folks that like to act like Nazis online. At the end of the day, that's our problem, not Palestinians. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. What I want to make clear is that if you pin all the atrocities Israel is committing right now on them secretly controlling America to help them out, then you miss the fact that Israel and America's imperial interests are one and the same 99% of the time. And even seeing that as advocating for a free Palestine is short-sighted, because while Zionism couldn't function effectively without American aid, they would still be there in that region doing something horrible to those people, the same way America is doing horrible things to people all over the world right now, not just in Palestine, but in Cuba, Venezuela, Sudan, the Congo, all of these places where there are global calamities going on, comes back to us in some form or fashion. And this is not to say that Zionism doesn't have its own specific interests, or that it doesn't have nukes, or that it was not still doing Zionism before it had America's help, but understand the relationship between Israel and America is one of mutual benefit, not some type of mind control that's happening from afar. And the reason why I connect that conspiratorial framing of Zionism back to a lot of white folks, white liberals, white leftists, is because it allows them to remain virtuous and not reflect on America's own history of genocide and how they fit into it. It's a framing to allow them to still be the heroes of the day, even when they're literally the villains. It allows them, like a grand partner, to say,
hey, I might have been part of the problem, but now I'm going to be part of the solution.
And all this other shit, just ignore it. Just pay no attention to the other things that clearly say that this is not the case. In short, this is white savior shit. A lot of it. Not all of it, not everyone, but a lot of it. And I'm tired of it. And I regret the fact that it took me to submit myself to racial abuse from a bunch of crack.
Well,
one thing I said years ago before any of this was serious is that once you've been around the block with so-called white allies, you recognize that they often don't care about you as much as they say they do. Again, word to Hubert Harrison. They just care that you represent a proxy for their fight against each other most of the time. They will use the premise that they're fighting for a good cause to troll other, usually white people that they don't like on Twitter. They'll literally act like Nazis, and then when people reasonably say, hey, stop that bullshit, they'll cry that they're being tone policed. And y'all are so unserious, and it's my fault for allowing that unseriousness to put me in this position to have to be like, all right, I'm good. And just one last thing to get off my chest. White leftists, I like y'all. Sometimes I love y'all, but I'm not one of y'all. And I've never been unclear about this. I don't have a white guilt savior complex. I didn't come through these politics through college. I came through them through life. I don't seek out strong fatherly male figures in my political outlook. I don't have the challenge of processing and unpacking whiteness in the imperial core like y'all do, but don't actually do the work to do. I'm not scared of losing y'all as an audience or losing access to any future or current opportunities because of any political positions I hold. And y'all would know this if you actually watch me. But like I said earlier, most of y'all
Yep.
don't. You just know that it's good to watch FD Signifier, but y'all motherfuckers don't watch my videos. I constantly get accused of seeking out and playing to a white audience, and low-key, that's just racist. Like, that's just racism. Sometimes it's from black haters too. Like, I have those, but like from y'all, it's just racism because it's hard for y'all to imagine that there is a large enough black community to make my numbers number the way they do. And I want to be clear, I have videos intended for a white audience, and those videos tend to do great. But the vast majority of my most watched videos on all of my channels are videos focused on black culture. The white audience comes around only for the explicitly political videos, which is one of the reasons why I stopped doing them shits like I was. Y'all didn't watch my video about a Spike Lee movie from nearly 30 years ago, which has over 1 million views. Y'all didn't watch my video on a barely remembered rap group from the 80s, which has over 1 million views. Y'all didn't watch my video on a black micro celebrity dating guru from the early 2000s that nobody even remembers, which has almost 1 million views. You didn't watch my Sinners video last year. You didn't watch my Lupe Fiasco video where I also mentioned Palestine. Y'all watched my Charlie Kirk video, and I saw the numbers number differently. And thank you for that. I made that knowing y'all would come through. I made that low-key for y'all, and I hope you appreciate it.
Maybe
I'm
this
glad
is
that
my
you watched. But that's the thing. Y'all only show up when it's a video that
Daisy
you can be
side
comfortably
pulling a
centered
little more
in.
weight.
And that's not a big
Haven't
deal for
seen
me.
more
That's something I want to talk about as
video.
well. But I wish y'all to recognize that says less about me and more about y'all. I just made a 4-hour Tyler Perry video, which has over 3 million views. I do not need a white audience. So don't mistake my cordiality
And
as your
it's
presence for thinking you run shit here. Y'all's access to
amazing.
me has been me trying to be a positive force in the space as much as I can manage to be. I try to align with like-minded people who I want to see win. I try to share my platform as much as I can. I love having random conversations with people that I sometimes feel like I don't agree with, but I can't do that shit no more because motherfuckers be watching, and now I got lice. And that's on me. I need to do a better job of enforcing boundaries. So that's what we're gonna do from here on out. Now let's talk about today's sponsor, which, yes, somehow still is Nebula. West, the world of pornography today is something completely different. Today, we're living in a goon world. Let's talk about today's sponsor then. For those who don't know, Nebula is an independent streaming service that houses content for some of YouTube's most prominent and talented creators, but you're also getting a lot more independent content there as well these days. Docuseries, reality shows, travel shows, even narrative podcasts, along with stuff I can't talk about and stuff that I can talk about, like my own short-form documentary on whiteness. You get access to all of this, countless hours of exclusive content by signing up for Nebula. And in doing so, you're helping one of the only independent streaming services not owned by some mega corporation or conglomerate that's willing to host the type of content that we really need in the world right now. Because we are creator-owned, we come to you directly for your support, so help out, click the link in the description or look for the QR code on the screen to sign up for Nebula today. Thank you to Nebula for sponsoring the video. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Light Work.
Oh my god, my mic was off. Anyway, I did want to highlight this. This is an organizer crash course that is being put on by Organize Utah on June 21st, Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. And this primarily is for people who are in Utah, like as you can see. But honestly, anyone who is looking to have more education on organizing, especially when it comes to organizing your workplace, that's primarily what this is about. I encourage you to still sign up for this. So this is happening at Pride Without Police. This is when I was snapping before I realized the mic was off. RSVP is required for this course as we have a limit on attendees. We may prioritize groups of coworkers over individuals. Yes. So especially they are going to be prioritizing people who are in Utah, but they are not actually specifically asking for this. So, I mean, it is put on by Organize Utah, and I encourage anyone who is a viewer in Utah to be doing this, to jump on this, because these trainings are very helpful and important. But let's continue. We anticipate having enough room for everyone, but if the trainings fill up, we will notify you ASAP and let you know when the next one is scheduled. If you are unable to attend this training, let us know times and dates that will work for you below, and we will reach out when we plan our next ones. So you can see that they ask for name, pronouns, love, phone number, email. This is to like verify that you're a real human being, describing your workplace. You can choose to not identify the workplace by name, especially people who are involved in work that it's a little more dangerous or that people are not wanting to just disclose for any reason. But also, people who are able to attend with coworkers, they will be given priority, so just keep that in mind. We also have this as part of a labor highlight that I wanted to show. Utah Worker Center. So this is, again, specific to Utah, but I covered a little bit ago their website and gave more of a description about what they do. They do a lot of really great organizing help and training and just have resources available for people who are looking to organize their workplaces. Even if people are not looking for that specifically, if they're looking to support movements that are showing solidarity, they're wanting to have more of a sense of community, they also do a really great job at scheduling events that are bringing people together to show solidarity and build community. So just wanted to get this announcement out there. So next week, the UWC open hours, which normally are from 6 to 10 on Wednesdays and Fridays, that these will be different. So just keep that in mind. So next Wednesday, nope. Wait, yes. I keep thinking time goes slower. But anyway, next Wednesday, these hours will be closed. And then the week after that, on Friday, they will be closed as well. If you need access to the Worker Center during this time, please contact Newland or Roger. And if you are somehow needing access and you are involved with the UWC, you are part of trying to get workplaces organized, you can contact me so that I can get you in touch with some of these people who are engaging in this and who will be able to determine if you are able to have time here or if it needs to wait to another week. Wait till another week. The UWC will still be open, just not with dedicated open hours. If you have a room reserved in that time frame, your reservation is still valid because many people reserve rooms that are specifically dedicated for organizing efforts. So, resuming Wednesday, June 24th, 6 to 10. So there we go. Because people have a million things that are going on and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So just keep that in mind. I did want to show, as we are getting into Culture Corner a little bit, this short that I saw. I think many of us are familiar with Nara Smith. She's kind of become like the symbol of being a trad wife and all of this like overtly femme conservative, as it is indicated in the name, traditional sort of cis-het relationship. And this video that I saw, I thought was very on the nose. Maybe not on the nose. That's not a great way of saying it. I think this is just like capturing how I have felt and what other people think and see when they are observing her content and how she's been able to build a career. So it's class signaling. Surprise, surprise. But here we go. Let's watch this.
Face before? For those of you who haven't, this is Nora. Have you seen this face before? For those of you who haven't, this is Nora Smith, a lifestyle creator who is known.
Ugh, I should have known.
Have you seen this face before? For those of you who haven't, this is Nora Smith, a lifestyle creator who is known for standing in front of a marble counter in these flowing dresses and making something from scratch that no reasonable person needs to make from scratch. She'll make marshmallows or Pop-Tarts, even cereal. Her videos rack up millions, tens of millions of views, and while she's not the only person making videos like this, she's definitely the most prominent. But this got me wondering, what's the fascination with her?
In the flowing dress part, it always is a dress, this idea of like being in the 1950s, of a woman who is always at the beck and call of a man. She is married to a white man. Is that a surprise? Not to me. Calling that out. But like this very specific idea of gender roles has to be called out with talking about trad wives, whatever it is, but it is this internalization of what it means to actually feel like what people need to do in patriarchy in order to be accepted, that people feel the need to buy into the system rather than resisting the system for collective liberation. It comes from a place that I think is very fear-induced and also, quite frankly, selfish, about self-preservation rather than it is about actually seeing a collectivist viewpoint.
Why is it that we can acknowledge the absurdity and the fantasy of what she's doing, but can't help but watch? Well, to answer this, we need to look to American sociologist Thorstein Veblen and his 1899 text, The Theory of the Leisure Class. His foundational argument
You
is
can't
that
help but watch? No. I have not seen any of her content. I have just seen her videos like recommended, but I don't think I've ever clicked on any of these. So I'm having a great time not watching her. But I do like this commentary.
Status is communicated not through what you produce, but through what you visibly decline to produce. An example he used was the aristocratic wife who didn't cook, whose refinement was a signal of her family's standing. Labor for productive reasons in Veblen's framework is tainted and signals necessity, and necessity is the enemy of prestige. But what makes Norma Smith so interesting is that it's an inversion of this framework, but it arrives at the same destination. She's in the kitchen, she's doing the labor, but the labor is so exquisitely unnecessary that it transcends utility and becomes its own form of waste. Veblen also had a term for this called conspicuous waste, which I have a video breaking down the 3 ways distance from economic necessity gets demonstrated by the elite. The cereal is not made from scratch because it's cheaper or healthier, but because the time it requires is itself the signal. She's spending 2 hours on a task that could be accomplished in 2 minutes, and the entire point is that she can afford to. Her time is so abundant that it can be poured into gestures that produce nothing tradable and nothing scalable. And as an aside, the ultimate irony is that she'll make from scratch foods that are entirely defined by their convenience. She takes food engineered for speed and submits them to the maximum possible domestic labor. It is conspicuous waste in its purest form. But here's where it gets even weirder. The labor that signals conspicuous waste is also generating income. Her kitchen is a set. She has a specific wardrobe. The conspicuous waste...
Yeah, the extra, like all of these dresses that are very expensive, that she's not afraid of them getting dirty because she has so many of them. That is also a signal of class, the expensiveness. So, as I have been calling out, as many other people have been calling out, high fashion, whatever the fuck that means, which really is just capitalist fashion, that it is not an indication of artistic integrity or artistic accomplishment and artistic significance even. It usually is just a signal for access to capital. It is a way to signal that, oh, she doesn't need to worry about keeping things clean because she just always has so many outfits to be choosing from.
Is being monetized, which means it is in fact tradable, producing brand deals and sponsorships. The performance of Vebelenian leisure is itself productive labor, and she is working quite seriously at the appearance of not needing to work. And by not positioning herself as an entrepreneur and instead a wife and mother, she is able to create an aesthetic coherence in her world, so her acts feel timeless rather than a performance. There's no wink, there's no ironic distance, and she can't acknowledge the absurdity, for she would collapse the entire illusion. The power of conspicuous waste is its absolute sincerity. Now, I'm telling you, I could spend days talking about distance from economic necessity, and I very well might on this page. So if you want to continue this conversation, please like and follow, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you seen this face before? For those of you who haven't, this is Nora Smith.
Anyway, so that's about her. We have been talking more about ballroom, especially with Pride, the Jellicle Ball, with that being um, a revival on Broadway of Cats, which is, I think, a much more appropriate way to have a revival of Cats. This is my side note. I think I was born to direct Cats at some point. I will, hopefully, even if it's just in my mind. I really love this version of Cats, the Jellicle Ball, actually having it be ballroom. It's a way to reclaim a lot of the queerness and also how Broadway spaces, what is considered Broadway, that's like class signaling, and how it has been a predominantly white space, that it is a reclamation of this, and like where we actually have a lot of the inspiration for Broadway even come from, which is primarily people of color, but especially when it comes to Black queer people. And I wanted to show a little bit of the history of ballroom culture. There are a number of documentaries and movies that are made on ballroom, as well as like a lot of people creating videos about the history of ballroom that I want to get to in more depth as Pride Month gets along, but I think this is a good way to get an overview. So, this is by Anita Diggs, and I think this video does a good job. It's pretty short, but it does a good job at showing a lot of the highlights. So here we go. It's called A Brief History of Ballroom Culture by Anita Diggs, and this was created 5 years ago. So.
Ballroom culture is a significant part of queer POC history. But what is ballroom culture? Tracing back to the Harlem Renaissance, balls started as an underground movement pioneered by queer POC. Drag queens would host these events as an act of defiance to show they could wear clothes of the opposite.
Yep, Harlem Renaissance in the 20s.
Gender,
with dandy
at a time
balls.
Where it was highly looked down upon to do so. The ballroom became a sanctuary for LGBTQ+ people of color, most of whom were kicked out of their current homes for various reasons. The community allowed refuge for many POC youth, and within this community there were houses. Houses consisted of mother and father figures, who were usually older members of the ballroom community.
Okay. Oh, shit.
They took into their house, who were usually...
So this is from the movie Paris is Burning, that documentary. I am wanting to watch Paris is Burning and have it on Patreon as a Patreon exclusive. So we'll see if that is coming, when that is coming. But the documentary is excellent. But we do have to confront that the documentary makers have exploitatively used these stories of human beings who, quite a few of these people died of AIDS, that they never saw the monetary benefits and the critical acclaim that came with all of this, that their stories, their personhood, that it was used to have people who came in from the outside make money from their experiences, just continuing this exploitation. But yeah, icons, all of these people. This is Willie Ninja. He is largely considered one of the like biggest creators of voguing, this older version of voguing, like the original form of it. What he's doing with his hands, I mean, like voguing comes from a lot of inspiration from like fashion magazines and modeling and Egyptian hieroglyphics, but what he's doing with his hands, even like doing that, this is very much reminiscent of like Madras dancing within Desi cultures, but specifically the Indian subcontinent. So like there is some of that involved as well.
Usually older members of the ballroom community. Whomever they took into their house were considered their children and were expected to attend rehearsals and participate at balls. Most importantly, the houses became a home and community for LGBTQ+ POC youth. Some notorious house names include the House of Ninja, House of Extravaganza, and the House of LaBeija.
Yeah, so that they're showing various clips that was from the show Pose. That is good. I do think as the show gets along, it's not as great as how it starts off with how many TV shows end up. But this particular snip, this clip, video, not video, this picture is from The Queen, which is a documentary on one of the biggest pageants, drag pageants in New York City.
At a ball, several houses come to compete for trophies and cash prizes by participating in voguing battles, catwalking, drag runways, and many other performance art-themed events. The ballroom scene became extremely popular in the 80s and is largely credited with popularizing the Vogue scene. Voguing, which began in Harlem by queer POC, was a form of dancing that replicated model poses with emphasis on arm and hand movements. Aside from ballroom events, in later years during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the community also became a safe place to discuss the disease and to offer support to those that had contracted it. Today, the impacts of ballroom
This
are
is from
still
Paris
widely
is
visible.
Burning.
Several popular cultural phrases such as shade, spilling tea, and fierce are attributed to the ballroom scene. 2018 TV show Pose brought
Like how
attention
I
to the
say-
ballroom scene and follows a
When we're talking about shade and stuff, but how I say fierce, that comes from ballroom.
young mother creating her house in 1980s New York. Present-day drag culture is heavily influenced by early ballrooms, and many still participate in them. There are numerous drag houses and drag mothers that exist all over the country and internationally. Today, the ballroom scene is still alive, most prominently based in the northeastern United States. Overall, the queer POC community created a safe space within their culture where they could freely express themselves through dance, fashion, and friendly competition. The community they created continues to be a creative platform for many queer POC youth, even a century after its creation.
Okay, there's that. And I did want to show, before we, well, Culture Corner isn't going to be quite as long today, but, oh, where did I put that exercise band? I was showing last week doing singing lessons with it. So I don't have enough time today to engage with more of the singing lessons, but maybe let's do a quick warm up for singing. So this isn't like a fully fledged singing lesson, I guess. But this is something that you will hear singers do, annoying people do. But there are many portrayals of this. Just doing like a siren sound that helps with warming up the lower parts of your voice with the higher parts of your voice, and then moving in and out of all of these different breaks. This is extremely helpful to not only make sure that like all parts of your range are warmed up, but also how you are able to move through, like I mentioned before, move through the breaks, that is hopefully being warmed up as well, that you aren't just having to do that while you are singing or performing, like for real, because then you're increasing your chances of it not going that well. So, for example, something that you can do is just on like an ooh, where you go like, or an ah, go from the lowest part of your voice, which is called like a vocal fry, where it goes like ah, ah, and let's do that again. You can hear at the top that I had a harder time getting up there. That's part of the exercise, part of warming up your voice. And especially depending on which part of your voice you're going to be using the most. So like if you are practicing a particular song, particular songs, if it is in a higher range, if it is in a lower range, if you are consistently having to jump between your chest voice and your head voice, which is that lower part of going like ah before you get into your head voice, which is where you kind of do that flip where it's like ah, like ah, that part that I just did, that is called being in your head voice. That is something that I want to go over more next week for our singing lesson. But there you go. It really helps to actually move through it all on a very intentional, smooth basis if you are using your breath to support yourself. You can sing lower, you can sing more with more control, you can sing higher if you actually have your breath engaged. So I recommend, if you have missed some of those conversations that we have had about breath and breath control and expanding lung capacity, to look those up. I am posting them on YouTube. There you go. They're in the playlist lessons, I believe. You can also find them in a lot of the larger Culture Corner sections that I am clipping. So there you go. I did want to show this video very quickly, again, getting into some of the background of Marxism. This is Philosophy Tube. She does some really great things when it comes to education and going over philosophy, as her name says. So, whoops. Here we go. On a higher speed. Whoa, that sound is loud. Mad Max.
March is my month of Marx, and in this part 1 we'll be looking at labour.
This is before her openly transitioning journey, at least, so just calling that out.
And class. So we're talking about production, making products. And in order to make any product, you first need 2 things. You'll need the means of production. This video is like a product which I made, and I can show you some of my means of production right now. It's my camera, my microphone, my tripod, lighting, the backboards I've got in my little studio here, and of course the talent as well as the editing software and so on. All of these things I own, but that only gets me a video. In order to get a YouTube video, I need YouTube, the website. That's the most important means of production for me, and it's not owned by me, but by Google. This means that making YouTube videos is what Karl Marx called capitalistic production, where the means of production are privately owned rather than owned by the labourers, and the products are sold in a market for profit. In this case, Google sells ad space on my videos. The second thing you'll need is labour. And labour for Marx is really important because it's the only thing that can increase the value of what you have. If you buy a block of wood and do nothing with it, then its value will remain constant. But if you labour to carve that wood into a chair, you will increase its value. Now, you could try and rip somebody off and sell the wood for more than it's worth, and supply and demand will come into it, but those things will only affect its price, which for Marx is not the same thing. He thought that prices would generally be proportional to value, but value, he thought, was definitionally how much labour it takes to make something under normal circumstances. Labour is measured in time, hours and minutes. The more labour it takes to make something under normal conditions, the more valuable it is. That's why, if you can automate a process, then the products become cheaper, because it now takes less labour to make them. If you've got a job needs doing that takes a lot of special training, then it becomes more expensive, because the time spent training is necessary labour for doing the job. Time is money, literally. This is called the labour theory of value. The normal conditions caveat is important here. If you slack off and it takes you 2 hours to do something that would normally only take 1, well then the value of the product doesn't double. It stays the same because under normal conditions it would only take 1 hour to make that. Similarly, if you work really, really hard and get the job done in 30 minutes, the value of the product doesn't halve. Now, the labour theory of value is, at this moment in history, unorthodox. Mainstream economics prefers a theory of value called marginalism. Marginalists say that the labour theory breaks down in certain circumstances. Marxists and post-Marxists say that actually it's marginalism that breaks down in the right circumstances. So just bear in mind as we go here that a lot of this is very hotly debated, and as we'll be seeing later in the series, there's a lot riding on it. How exactly value becomes price is one of the big talking points, though some economists prefer to just ignore value altogether and just focus on prices, since you can model an economy and find out how to make that mad dollar just by looking at something's price. Value brings with it a whole bunch of questions about fairness and whether the price is right, and mainstream economics often prefers to just gloss over those issues. The other big talking point is the so-called great contradiction. If labor is the source of value, then why aren't the most valuable products made in the most labor-intensive industries? Some people think that this completely scuppers the labor theory. There might be ways of getting around it, but we don't need to worry about that. I'm just making sure you know where we are on the theoretical map. Labour power, the ability to labour, is in Marxist economics the most important commodity in the world. It's the only commodity that, when applied, increases the value of what you have. Labour power is found only in people, and when you go to work, you rent out your labour power for the day. But your ability to work, your labour power, doesn't just grow on trees. It takes a certain amount of food and shelter and clothing and so on to sustain your labour power from 9 to 5. Now, all of those things have value that can be measured in labour time as well. So let's assume that it takes, say, 4 hours of labour to produce everything you need to work for one day. You go to work at 9 a.m, and by 1 p.m, 4 hours later, you have paid for yourself for that day. The amount of labour going into you is the same as the amount of labour coming out of you. But you don't go home at 1 p.m, you have to stay the rest of the day. So your boss gets 4 hours labour out of you, during which time you are generating what Marx called surplus value. Value on top of the value it took to get you there. Profit, essentially. But because the means of production are privately owned, anything you make belongs to your boss or to your company, and they sell the products you make for profit and keep that profit. The surplus value goes not to you, but to them. And that right there, in a nutshell, is why Marx thought capitalism was unavoidably exploitative. Even if you're making a great wage and you're happy with your job, under capitalism he thought you are always being paid less than what your labour is actually worth. That's how capitalism works. You hire other people to increase the value of what you have, and then you keep that extra value for yourself. Marx thought that capitalism, and everything that has come with it, is sustained only by exploiting the working class. But hang on a minute, wait, what was that about class? How can you take everybody who's working in very different jobs and lump them all together into one group called the working class? Well, the idea that society is made up of groups, which we call classes, that struggle with each other is called conflict theory. And it doesn't mean that everybody within the same class has exactly the same experience. It just means that we can model society as being made up of those groups. A little bit like in meteorology. When we look at a weather front, we know that not every molecule of air has the same temperature and moves in the same direction, but we can observe trends in groups of them and model those trends. Marx thought that we could model class conflict so accurately, we could even predict the future with it. He thought that society would follow an inevitable progress towards communism, as the relations of the working classes to the means of production changed. This is called historical materialism, and as we'll be seeing later in the series, he may have been a little hasty there. But it's not just the working class who get a raw deal, Marx thought. Remember earlier on we said capitalism is when the means of production are privately owned? So how do capitalists get to own them? You've got to have money in order to buy somebody else's labour. You've got to have money to make money. So how does capitalism get started? Marx's answer is that it's usually violence. He lived in 19th century England, where a lot of capital and property was either being violently confiscated from foreigners, there's the link between capitalism and imperialism, or inherited from people who at some point in history got their wealth through feudalism or conquest. Even if people invent totally new inventions, as during the Industrial Revolution they did, the conditions that allow them to do that often come about through that violence. This leads us to a consideration of capitalism's consequences, which will be part 2 in the series. That's the end of part 1. You've learned about Marx's labour theory of value and the different relations of classes to the means of production. In part 2, we'll be looking at capitalism's problems and alienation. Today's show was sponsored by audible.com. If you go to audibletrial.com/philosophytube, you can get a free audiobook. And yes, they do have Marx's Das Kapital. You can get it with a free 30-day trial of their audiobook service that you can cancel anytime, and every time one of you signs up, I get a tiny bit of money.
I've actually never seen one of her videos being more mask presenting before having more visible indications of transitioning. And I have to say, when people transition, their taste increases astronomically. Also, how much funnier she has become. And this is a very common phenomenon when it comes to queer people. Just having more liberation, feeling like you can be more yourself, also being forced to have a sense of humor about many things of just existing and embracing who you are, actually deciding what you like and what you don't like that feels more true to you. Love. I'm very happy for her. She looks much more liberated these days, and I love to see that. Okay, so let's get into the Communist Manifesto. We're still on the bourgeois and proletarians section, section 1. And we were only able to read a couple of pages. But we are going to finish this section and then be done for the day. So, next week, I know this week I haven't done quite as long of streams. So, next week, I am planning some things, moving some things around, just so that I can get to more of a regular schedule. On YouTube, I have my schedule show as 2:30 to 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I do not always abide by this. On Twitch, I say that the schedule is 2 to 6:30, which I abide by even less. So, I mean, it just depends on life and what is going on. But anyway, that's a work in progress. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. So, getting back to the Communist Manifesto, we just barely ended on this sentence. The bourgeoisie has torn away the veil of sentiment from the family relation and reduced it to a mere money relation. Very profound and true. The bourgeoisie has shown how the brutal... Me trying to read ahead in my mind and just like mixing up words that are coming up next. So, the bourgeoisie has shown how the brutal manifestation of force, which the reactionaries admired so much in the Middle Ages, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what human activity can accomplish. It has created very different marvels from the Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted very different expeditions from the ancient migrations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without incessantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the methods of production and consequently all social relations. So I think this is like especially, it's a continuing thing as we're existing in capitalism, global capitalism, especially as it is exported and perpetuated by the US empire. How this idea of like the Industrial Revolution, how that was displacing workers, creating even more of these wealth gaps, but how that transformed into more of like the internet age, how that contributed to the exact same situation. And now we are finding that as they are getting as much profit as they can right now, they're needing to explore the capitalists, the bourgeois, to find even more avenues for exploitation, for consuming all of our wages and salaries, and that is largely seen with AI and robots. And also these like self-checkout things. This is a side note, but I went and got more thread today so that I could be working on more bracelets. But there was a worker today, like I was in line. I've never been to Michael's where they've actually had self-checkout before. So that was a first for me. I was in line to check out and a worker had the nerve to be like, "Do you have a question or no?" And I was like, "No, I'm just waiting to check out." And she's like, "Oh, well, then you can go to those and serve yourself." I'm like, "I didn't know about that." Okay, sorry. You don't have to be an asshole. I understand you're underpaid, but I mean, we all are. The nerve to assume that everyone understands everything about how this place is functioning right now, or any place for that matter. Anyway. Where was I? This continual revolutionizing of the methods of production, constant disturbance of the whole social system, perpetual agitation... Oh wait, no, I skipped a sentence. The preservation of old methods of production was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all previous industrial classes. The continual revolutionizing of the methods of production, constant disturbance of the whole social system, perpetual agitation and uncertainty distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all others. All fixed and deeply rooted social relations with their train of established and venerated beliefs and ideas are dissolved. All that places them grows old before it can crystallize. All that was solid and established crumbles away. All that was holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to look with open eyes upon his conditions of life and true social relations. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole globe. Everywhere it must make its nest. Everywhere settle, settler colonialism, and everywhere establish its connections and extraction. The bourgeoisie has, by the exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to the production and consumption of all countries. It has, to the despair of reactionaries, cut from under the feet of its industry its national basis. Old established national industries have been destroyed and are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a vital question for all civilized nations. By industries which no longer use native raw materials, well, that's not necessarily true. They are constantly needing to extract. But raw material brought from the furthest zone. Okay, so it's meaning it's not taking from places the resources that are part of that situation, but a hallmark of this capitalism is this sourcing from other lands, and that like the higher in class and more exclusive the product, that the farther that these things are needing to be extracted. But we are also seeing now how there is somewhat of a return to that concept of taking from like these native resources, where the resources from other lands are being so plundered that everything is just up for grabs. And we're seeing this especially when it comes to AI data centers, but how the capitalists, they often are still invested in that earlier concept of it, where they are not living near these data centers themselves. So, holding those things all at the same time here. Instead of the old wants, satisfied by the products of the country, new wants arise, demanding for their satisfaction the products of the most distant lands and climes. Instead of the old local and national isolation and self-sufficiency, universal trade has developed and the interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual productions of one nation become the common property of all. National narrowness and exclusiveness become daily more and more impossible, and out of the many national and local literatures, a world literature arises. So this idea of like globalism, like globalizing everything, especially with the internet and the digital age. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all the instruments of production and by constantly facilitating communication, draws into civilization even the most barbarian nations. Okay. The use of that word is inherently racist, so. And anti-colonial, and colonial, I should say, if we're taking an anti-colonial lens, which we must. The cheapness of its commodities is the heavy artillery with which it lays low all Chinese walls, with which it compels the most obstinately hostile barbarians to capitulate. So again, calling Chinese people barbarians. This is deeply problematic and racist. It forces all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeois mode of production. It forces them to adopt so-called civilization, to become bourgeois. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the town. It has created enormous cities. It has prodigiously augmented the numbers in the towns as compared with the rural districts, and thus has rescued a great part of the population from the idiocy of country life. Idiocy, meaning like lack of like systems to provide education. I personally am more of like a cosmopolitan type person, so I enjoy actually having more spaces that are queer and accepting to go to, so there is that aspect. But also he is talking about more from like this Rousseau perspective of how the hallmark of cities is largely that there is a larger concentration of wealth and a concentration of the population to generate that wealth, where they are not on the receiving end of that wealth. Just as it has made the country dependent on the town, so has it made barbaric or semi-barbaric countries dependent on civilized countries, nations of peasants on bourgeois nations, the Orient on the Occident. So again, deeply problematic of barbaric nations, when really he's just talking about colonial extraction, and that these nations are not necessarily wanting to be dependent on these colonial powers, but that colonization in and of itself is making it so that these people are completely exploited. The lands are, their labor is, and that it is part of colonialism to make these places dependent on these oppressive systems to continue, so that they can continue the exploitation and extraction. The bourgeoisie ever more and more arrests the dispersion of the means of production, property, and population. It has agglomerated population, centralized the means of production, and concentrated property in the hands of a few. The necessary consequence of this was political centralization. Independent or loosely connected provinces have separate interests, laws, governments, and tariffs were lumped together into a single nation with one government, one constitution, one national class interest, one customs tariff. The bourgeoisie during its, except for, yeah. Like, as opposed to, like, what it's talking about is as opposed to this hierarchy that is created where it is not universal for all classes. The bourgeoisie, because they're controlling everything. The bourgeoisie, during its class rule of scarce 100 years, has created more powerful and colossal productive forces than all past generations together. Subjection of the forces of nature, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steamships, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for cultivation, canalization, meaning canals, of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What previous century even suspected that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? Thus, we have seen the means of production and exchange on whose basis the bourgeoisie built itself up were generated in feudal society. At a certain stage of the development of these means of production and exchange, the condition under which feudal society produced and exchanged, feudal organization of agriculture and manufacture, in one word, feudal property relations, become no longer compatible with the already developed productive forces. They hampered production instead of aiding it. They became so many fetters. They had to be burst asunder. They were burst asunder. Into their place stepped free competition with its corresponding social and political constitution, with the economic and political rule of the bourgeois class. Under our own eyes, a similar movement is going on. Bourgeois conditions of production and exchange, bourgeois property relations, modern bourgeois society, which has conjured up such gigantic means of production and exchange, is like a magician who is no longer able to control the infernal powers he has evoked. Infernal powers. For many years, again, that also seems like this Orientalism that was discussed before being applied here. Not like magicians are people who are practicing sleight of hand, but any sort of like magic or that has roots in like indigenous traditions is viewed as mysticism. For many years, the history of industry and commerce has been but the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against the property relations, which are the conditions of life for the bourgeoisie and its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises which, in their periodical recurrence, bring into question, each time more threateningly, the existence of the whole bourgeois society. In these crises, a great part, not only of existing products, but also of previously created productive forces, are periodically destroyed. In these crises, a social epidemic breaks out, which would have seemed an absurdity in all previous epochs, the epidemic of overproduction. Society finds itself suddenly thrown back into a state of momentary barbarism. A famine, a universal war of devastation, seems to have cut off the supply of all means of life. Again, the reliance on this system of exploitation and capitalism, which I guess is the same thing. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there's too much civilization, too much of the means of life, too much industry, too much commerce, too much capitalism. The productive forces, not like civilization, because there's also this sort of like Western industrialized colonial perspective of what civilization actually means. The productive forces at the disposal of society are no longer favorable to the development of bourgeois property conditions. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they free themselves from these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society. They endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The bourgeois system has become too narrow to contain the wealth which it creates. Too narrow to contain its wealth. So, like, it's addressing this, like, cannibalistic aspect of what it means to be under bourgeois oppression, under capitalism. That it just keeps eating and eating until there isn't anything left, which then is not in the interest of capitalism, but that is the nature of capitalism. How does the bourgeoisie overcome these crises? They have to exploit the crisis itself, which is what we see with war and co-opting revolutions. On the one hand, by compelling the destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other hand, by the conquest of new markets and the more thorough exploitation of the old markets. And with what result? With the result that they pave the way for more widespread and more destructive crises, and at the same time diminish the means whereby those crises can be avoided. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie conquered feudalism are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But the bourgeoisie has not only forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also produced the men who will wield these weapons, the modern workers, the proletarians, which, as we are seeing now, particularly in this age we are finding ourselves in with AI, that they're trying to get rid of workers altogether, and that this is one of the hallmarks of like very, very late stage capitalism, where they are not viewing us as having any sort of worth whatsoever, even to generate their wealth, that they are so bent on this cannibalistic extraction that they don't care if it just completely destroys the proletarian class altogether by taking away our wages and livelihoods and their means for making money. But that is the cannibalistic, just eating their own aspect of capitalism and bourgeoisie. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, i.e. capital, is developed, in the same proportion is developed the proletariat, the class of modern workers who live only so long as they find work. Yep. And who only find work so long as their work increases capital. These workers, forced to sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity, like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition and all the fluctuations of the market. So again, all of these ideas of like, oh, we need a free market, like laissez-faire in capitalism in the US, that is just doing what it is built to be doing. The work of the proletariat has been deprived of its individual character by the extended use of machinery in the division of labor, and therewith all its attraction for the worker has been lost. He becomes a mere appendage of the machine, of whom only the simplest, most monotonous, and easily learned operations are required, until they're trying to get rid of that even because they don't like us having human qualities and complaining. They don't like being reminded that we're human beings and that they're reliant on us. The cost of production of the worker is in consequence reduced almost entirely to the means of subsistence that he requires for his maintenance and for the propagation of his race. Now the price of a commodity, and therefore of labor, is equal to the cost of its production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the labor increases, the wage decreases. Furthermore, in proportion as the use of machinery and division of labor increase, in the same proportion does the burden of labor increase, either by prolongation of the working hours, by increase of the work exacted in a given time, or by the increased speed of the machine. Having it be more mechanized, also reducing wages, eliminating wages in and of themselves, like what's happening with all of these oligarchs who are creating these conglomerations where they own all of these media companies, and big pharma invested in the industrial war complex and genocide and beauty and fashion, that it's like, oh, they are just wanting to own everything, and they are intentionally eliminating workers to consume their wages. And they try to say it's in this effort for efficiency. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of the patriarchal master into the great factory of the industrial capitalist. Masses of workers crowded together in the factories are organized like soldiers, like hierarchy of subalterns and officers. They are not only the slaves of the bourgeois class, the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The more openly this despotism proclaims gain to be its object, the more petty, hateful, and galling it becomes. Yes, where the more money people are making, the more distance they have from the conditions of the workers that are generating this profit, the more they are hateful with everything that they are doing. It is seen basically in all forms of having to make money. And even with like a supervising class. The less dexterity and strength are required in manual labor, i.e., the more modern industry develops, the more is the labor of men displaced by that of women. Okay? I mean, the differences of age and sex have no longer any social importance for the working class. All are now mere instruments of labor, whose price varies according to age and sex. Okay, yeah. So, like, the more it is necessary for, to continue the exploitation of people, that women actually get to be in the workplace. But this also is not necessarily talking about the, coming from a feminist perspective of, oh, women actually are wanting, it's viewing women just as being more part of the exploitative class by employers, by the bourgeoisie, and not exploited because of gender and by being oppressed and viewed only as a commodity for population growth. No sooner is the exploitation of the worker by the employer so far at an end that he receives his bare money wage than he is set upon by other sections of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. The little middle class, the small shopkeepers, tradespeople, peasant proprietors, handicraftsmen, and peasants, all these classes sink into the proletariat, partly because their small capital is not sufficient for modern industry and is crushed out in the competition with the large capitalists, and partly because their specialized skill is depreciated by the new methods of production. Thus is the proletariat recruited from all classes of the population. So, yes, so it's like the proletariat, this is why we have to be talking about like being in working class, but also like probably a better example of this, or a better framing of it rather, is talking about the ruling class versus the working class, or the 1% versus the 99%. Because even though we have people who are middle class, upper middle class even, it doesn't mean that they can compete whatsoever with billionaires who come from generational wealth, who are not able to spend all of the money that they have in multiple lifetimes. So they don't even care at this point that they are dependent on us for continuing to generate wealth. So we didn't finish this section, but I think that is where I'm going to stop, just so that I can get going with what I have planned for the weekend. But anyway, it's important to be talking about this. But as you can see, it's also important to be applying a decolonizing lens in how certain people are being portrayed. He has like a pretty accurate read on how people are exploited, but also like how, if we are truly wanting collective liberation, we shouldn't be looking to this as just like a manual in and of itself, but also how there is praxis, a way to be applying these types of concepts in a way that also are embracing anti-colonialism, decolonization, anti-racism, especially when it comes to anti-blackness, where people have been historically commodified through slavery. And of course, like, black people have not been the only population that has been enslaved, but has seen like this global aspect of commodifying human beings of a particular race of people. So that must be addressed. Misogyny, commodities, and commodifying gender of people being viewed as commodities in that way. Also with queerness and having people, whether they are able-bodied or not, whatever that means, to determine who is worthy of work, who is can work, because there are all of these barriers to entry for working for the capitalist, because once again, there are certain people who their lives are viewed as worth more than others. This is creating a hierarchy of human dignity that is placing monetary value on human life, which cannot have a monetary value. Anyway, that was a little bit of a shorter stream, still somewhat chaotic. This is kind of par for the course for me. But also, I think there are a number of things that are great to be discussing that we were able to finish up today. I still am wanting to watch more of these different sections of Philosophy Tube and her videos that she has on Marxism. I also am wanting to get more of this decolonized lens of Marxism, especially with all of these various intersections of marginalization and how that plays a larger role in upholding capitalism. But once we get rid of capitalism, it doesn't mean that these various structures of discrimination and internalized biases, conditioned biases, are not needing to be deconstructed themselves. So, there we go. I may follow up with a little bit of Culture Corner for Monday, but we'll see. Anyway, thank you for being here. It was great chatting with you. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening. If it is your weekend, that you have a good weekend. If not, that you keep trucking. Hang in there. And I hope to see you soon. Okay, bye.